Hi, everyone. Was that loud?
Good evening. I'm going to call to session April 8th, 2025 meeting of the Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Education. We're going to open tonight, change the schedule a tiny bit. We're going to move our student presentations. We know you're in the oh,
They're going after the presentation.
oh, they are going after the presentation.
They want to hear the whole show.
Okay. Well, kudos. So we're going to begin tonight with something that we've been waiting on for more than 8 weeks, which is the secret analysis of behind the planned work for the bond. And who's going to start? Is it Rena? Are you going to start? Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're going to start with the
bond.
We're going to start with SECRA? Because that's what's listed first.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
So we have Matt and Danielle from Land Associates and Bob from LA Group, who were here a couple months ago, come back, sort of walk us through the SECRA document and look at the findings from it.
Start first.
So whomever would like to start.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having us back. I'm going to just guess that not everybody on the board has gone through a major capital project. I know Jody's provided her expertise along the way and her years of experience here on the Board of Ed, but part of our responsibility to the school district is to explain to you the State Environmental Quality Review Act, provide you with our opinions on the environmental due diligence required to undertake a large capital project. And with the seeker process, you have to fill out an EAF form or an environmental assessment form. And what you have on the screen behind you is part of the interaction of doing an environmental assessment form and interacting with one of your involved agencies. So we do have Rena from PBDW to explain when we submit a project like this that might affect or do work on a building over 50 years old and may affect a property that's potentially under consideration for listing by the Historic Registry or the State Historic Preservation Office. We send out a notification to them of what the project might look like and how it might impact a state potentially historic resource. And we engage with that involved agency. So we have submitted something through the state loves their acronyms, through CRIS, the Cultural Resource Information System. Thank you. And we file the project for their review, and we sit back and we wait for their review. And so from there, I think Rena can explain how the project has evolved or the design of the project has evolved. And then we'll come back to some of the more overreaching environmental assessments that we've done. So I'm going to turn it over to Rena.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Hi, Rena.
Hi. So during the SECRA review, as Matt outlined, SHPO submission is part of that. And during the SHPO submission, we had the opportunity to take a second look at the Farragut entry. There were actually quite a few studies that we looked at and that we had to essentially prove to SHPO our case for the Farragut entry. Because it is on a primary facade and we're adding to a historic building on a primary facade. So they were actually quite receptive to the location that we had determined for the entry, being on the primary facade, centered on the center wing. That was something that after we kind of walked through with them, they really understood that we're not touching the historic facade of the original Farragut wing. We're not touching the historic facade of the high school entrance, Mount Hope wing, and that situationally on the site, the center of the central ring really makes sense to kind of reactivate what was the center of the complex originally, so between the Washington wings and the Farragut wings. What we did do during this design review with them is also take a second look at the scale and materiality of the Farragut entry. So this is the original scheme that the board is more familiar with, and then I'm going to go to our revised scheme, which is smaller in size. It does punch through the primary facade instead of wrapping around and using the side doors. So that does create new openings in the facade that will require us to move a gas line, which is part of why we didn't originally go there. But, in the full consideration of everything and the scale, we did relook at that and reduce both the height and width of the entry.
Can I just a quick question on
Sure.
that? Okay, yeah, okay. Just those changes, the substantive changes of moving off the side doors, moving into the front, is that SHPO, was that a SHPO thing? Or were they directed it to be done that way, or?
It wasn't necessarily directed. It was kind of working in tandem with them to identify what is of historic relevance and primary relevance side. Something
Gotcha.
that we felt was of relevance were the areas that we outlined that we're not touching. And part of that is some of the decorative work on those side entrances as well.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yep. So the revised design, like I said, is reduced in scale and in materiality. It's a little bit more formal in the material approach, where we have a base with signage built into what would be a stone base, and then some channel glass above that with a center glazed canopy, or center glazed vestibule with a canopy above. And so still up for ADA access. We've tried to lower that a bit so that the ramping continues on the inside instead of trying to bridge all of the grade changes on the exterior. But all of those also need to be confirmed once we get final surveys and documents and really get into design. So this is really just conceptually. So just another view, this was the original scheme and then the revised scheme. And just as a note to look at something that we study in reviewing historic buildings is also visibility to any historically significant elements, and some of the metalwork underneath the windows on that center facade are what we'd identified as historically significant. And so just preserving those views from the public right-of-way, you can see that those kind of sight lines taken as well. So those are some updates as part of the process, and with this being our revised design for the entryway.
Thank you, Rena.
Just one thing I think it's kind of important to add. The context of what we see in this rendering with the flanking trees left and right of the entryway, those are, of course, new trees, because you're very well aware you have beautiful, very, very, very tall end-of-life trees at the front of the building. Any construction you undertake would certainly compromise the root structure. Those trees are really likely at the end of their life anyway. So just not to misrepresent things here and make sure we're clear.
That's a good
those
point.
are new plantings in front. And so I think just from a sense of scale, SHPO was very receptive to this proposition, and we got a letter of support, which is part of the process of going through this EAF, through the seeker process, and working with an involved agency like SHPO. You need to have their endorsement of the project moving forward to close out that particular aspect of review. And so that's sort of where we stand today. As your design professional, we have filled out an environmental assessment form. We've turned it over to the school district along with budget documents, conceptual plans, renderings, and any correspondence we've had with involved agencies to make you aware of our opinions of the project. And with that, you're supposed to make your own opinion about the environmental impact of the project. So we're here today to coach you through that process and let you know that of the 30 to 50 pages that we sent you, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have developed as a result of reviewing that. Because you will be making an environmental determination, a determination about the environmental impact of the project. And it's not a major project by what we consider the standards through the State Environmental Quality Review Act. But there are polarizing topics to the community. And because of that, we think it's appropriate to just sort of air what the Board of Ed may have in terms of concerns, make sure you've had adequate time to evaluate our opinions and ask questions. So we're here today to answer any questions you might have about that. And then, Bob?
Yeah, I'd just like to add a couple of things. Like Matt was saying, this isn't a big project as far as this
Could you just
seeker.
speak into the mic a little more just so people at
Yeah,
home can hear?
sure.
Thank you.
Like Matt said, this project really isn't a large project when it comes to seeker. There's not a lot of thresholds that kicked us into doing a long form, which we provided you today. There's certain criteria that you have to meet to get to certain classifications of the project. And the two criteria that kicked us into the long form was historic relevance of the building, the eligibility of that, and then just the overall acreage of land disturbance. So those are the two major criterias. But then once we get to going to do the long EAF form, we have to then look at the rest of the environmental potential concerns or potential impacts.
So that's interesting. So what you're saying is we sort of like got into the longer format just by a couple of small details. The benefit is then it's not that they just look at those two details from the longer view. They then look at everything that they would anyway. So,
Right.
Okay.
The
So it's
seeker-
comprehensive.
The seeker is a short form, so if you didn't
Gotcha.
go there, then you just fill, there's just less detailed questions. Long form's a better, more thorough look, and a lot of times we encourage the board to do long form just in case people have issues or just to make sure we took a hard look at all the impacts, and this was our determination.
That's great.
So you're heading in the right direction, at least in my mind.
That's great. Thank you.
And then additionally, the part one, your consultants, myself, and Land filled out the part one based off of online resources that the state provides, geotechnical information, mapping, and our experience in the past. We do this quite a bit. So that's typical. And then we also fill out the part two for you as well, but that's more your document. Those are just our suggestions and from using our experience to explain why we thought there was no or small impacts. We didn't identify any moderate to large impacts on part two, but like Matt said earlier, that will become your document, and if you want to make changes to that, that's great. We can talk through them and make adjustments as we go, but just wanted to kind of outline that to you.
That's great.
Alex, sorry. One last thing when we share the mic. The action, as we described it, so the page one of the EAF describes the scope of work. And if you went back in time, 6 months ago when we started this, the scope of work was different. It was more broad. There was more disturbance. And rather than refining the description of the scope of work, we looked at the full magnitude of the project so that if there were reasons for the board to change, the community to change their opinions and influence the board, that we've looked at the worst impact of the project. So there may be items listed in here that are not going to be carried forward by the Board of Ed, but we're part of the environmental due diligence required by the Board of Ed and by your design professionals to give you an opinion on. Okay. So we've looked at everything, and this document is the result of looking at everything. And again, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, for sure. So I guess one of the headlines to make clear is that it's a negative finding, which is positive, because it's always kind of confusing.
Sure, yeah.
Right. Can you just explain a little bit what a negative finding from SECRA means, colloquially, let's say?
It means that you didn't find anything of great significance that would require additional study or go to a bigger study, being an environmental impact statement, which is a much larger study and that goes into all environmental factors even more and takes a lot longer time to get there. Personally, I don't think you're there just because of the two criteria that kind of got us so long for to begin with. But again, that's a board decision and a legal counsel decision. A lot of times they would give you some guidance on that as well if they had any reason for concern.
Okay.
That's basically it.
What I found interesting also, and I don't know if the other board members noticed this, but on the part 3, where sort of the final declaration, page 2 of part 3, I guess I had sort of expected this process to be like a triage where everything's fine or it's got concerns or issues and then it's problematic, right? But in the SECRA, there are actually three levels of passing, let's call it, right? The most basic is what's here, which under A, which is what we were selected for, right? Which is this project will result in no significant adverse impacts on the environment, and therefore an environmental impact statement need not be prepared. Accordingly, this negative declaration is issued. I guess we sort of spoke about it, but underneath that, there could be B, which is, although this project could have a significant adverse impact on the environment, the impact will be avoided or substantially mitigated because of the following conditions which will be required by the lead agency. So we cleared that bar even. You know, so I assume there are a lot of projects where it's sort of a negative finding, but there are ameliorations that have to be planned in as part of the project. That's not even the case for us. We have sort of a clean slate. And just to point out, there's also a C, which is, I guess, what you bring up, which is that the project is complex enough that we'd have to do even a further analysis. So we sort of had the cleanest of clean slates. Would that sort of be accurate to say?
Correct.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I had asked them to take us through the sort of a findings page. So wherever the document touched on an issue that the state wanted to have some information about, that was called out separately, which we're going to look at. Do any of the trustees have any questions for them beforehand or on the entryway as well? Just.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is this not on? I'm not sure if it comes later, but I did have some questions. Maybe kind of the stormwater, water quality, soil erosion, all of the stuff. Could you just give us some background? Because, you know, it really looks at different aspects of that I just wanted to kind of get some background for the public on.
The part
Or is that
three?
coming-
Yeah, that's coming
Okay,
up.
coming next.
Can we go, so the part three touches on all those things. Can we kind of walk us through part three? Which is, this is sort of all the findings of any scale.
Right,
are
and so,
included in
so
it.
layout, there's a part one, which they said the guy filled in. The part two asks more pointed questions, but the answers are driven from part one, so they kind of fill in the blanks for you, and then you have to try to explain yourself further in part three, and that's kind of where we're at here. So how do you want to attack this? You want to go through all of the part three, or just particular items, or how would you like to see this?
I think all would be good, because I had questions on the bedrock as well,
Sure.
which I think is in there.
Yeah, so
Sure.
why don't we just read down it, and if it's, you know, we don't have to read the whole thing, I guess, but,
Well, so the first one, proposed impact on land. So the basic question for item number one is the proposed action may involve construction on or physical alteration of land surface of the proposed site. That's an obvious yes. So once you answer that yes and check that box, you have to answer the subsequent questions. So 1A, the proposed action may involve construction of land where depth to water table is less than 3 feet. The answer that's been proposed here is no impact, because based off our geotechnical information, groundwater was not encountered, and we went to depths greater than 3 feet. So that was a pretty easy answer. 1B, the proposed action may involve construction on slopes greater than 15%. And just to summarize the answer, that's small. We know we have some slopes steeper than that, but we're going to minimize construction because we're trying to maintain the character and the existing grades of the site, A, for just easy construction and cost. But we do recognize, and the reason why it's small, that we will do some disturbance, building retaining walls, trenching in for pipes or conduits. So we classify that as a small impact, but it's temporary as well.
is 15% because that's kind of where you need to put a retaining wall? Is that significant, like in and of itself?
15% is just a decent slope, not terribly steep, but it might be harder to establish grass. When it's going to get washed out more often, so you might need to use different erosion control methods. And that's an additional thing that I have here in the answer is, and that was a good time to explain that any site that you disturb over an acre, you're required to do a stormwater prevention pollution plan, which also has sediment and erosion control measures in there, and it has to be all according to the state regulations. So we're going to have to do that for this project, just like all the projects that I work on. And so once we do that, that's going to require the silt fence, that's going to require temporary basins, it's going to require a lot of things to make sure that you're not causing erosion downstream or anyplace else, so we really contain that on the site. And you'll see in some subsequent questions, we refer to those same regulations over and over again because it's kind of that's how we resolve, that's how we're mitigating. We also say that there's a lot of times a small impact because you never know, that during construction, some temporary erosion may go off-site because the silt fence was down or something like that. So, you know, in all disclosure, you have to say there's at least a small chance of some of those potential impacts. So.
Oh, so that's interesting. So it's also, some of these findings have to do with the construction phase, but not the existence of the project once it's done.
Well, and with the stormwater prevention pollution plan, we'll have to, by law, we have to regulate the water flow and volume off our site. We have to treat the water first, let the sediments come out of it so we don't contaminate downhill from there. We also have to release it at a slow rate so it doesn't cause erosion. So there's long-term and short-term practices in order to fulfill that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So 1C.
Yeah, 1C, the proposed action may involve construction on land where bedrock is exposed or generally within 5 feet of the existing ground surface. And we're saying there's a small impact. We did 41 soil borings, and we found bedrock at 4 locations. In 2 locations, bedrock was encountered within 5 feet, and the other 2 locations was found at a depths greater. We feel that there would be minimal to no bedrock removal for this project. We know the locations. The locations aren't where the fields are going, is where we're proposing parking areas. So if anything, we might lose parking, but it's not worth, at least in my opinion, at this early stage, to say that we're going to move bedrock because it's not going to be cost prohibitive. So,
Gotcha.
we don't
Yeah,
think
that
it's
was my
major.
question. So based on this sort of 10%, were those samples of any concern, those areas where we're going to be doing parking or the retaining wall or any of that where we would have additional costs?
The bedrock was found in the parking lot area up on a hill, and in my professional opinion, I think we just stay away from putting the parking, it would be too
Right.
expensive to
Okay.
install. So,
Good.
but the major elements, the fields, are okay, we don't have bedrock issues at any of those locations. It's pretty much just up in the hill in the woods, and
That
near
makes
that, near
sense.
the existing
See the
drive
rocks
is where
there.
it was identified.
Okay, so stay away from that so we don't add costs.
Yeah,
That's
so we
good.
don't have to build walls and kind of remove bedrock, so, again, we don't have a detailed design, but that'd be the intent and the approach.
Good.
All right. 1D, I think we're at, yeah, the proposed action may involve the excavation and removal of more than 1,000 tons of natural material. This is a small impact in our opinions as well, and this question is really derived from mining practices. If you look at online to research the secret documentation on the state website, it's really about mining and some excavation, but all our sites, or not all, but majority of our sites do include this much excavation or more than 1,000 tons because we're cutting, moving lots of materials and usually flattening out grades. But we don't think it's a big concern or a big impact on the site. 1E, the proposed action may involve construction that continues for more than 1 year or multiple phases. We're saying it's a small impact. We're not sure on the exact sequencing and staging or sequencing, but the construction may occur in multiple phases, but the overall level of activity will not be substantially different from a single phase project. We may have one big bid and maybe we break out the different time frames based off of seasonal weather constraints, but in general, your construction time will be about the same.
I'm just going to add here, the action includes the building additions
Yes.
and the athletic field improvements. So
Yeah.
there are multiple phases to some degree planned for the building additions, for renovations. So I know Bob's focused on the land development,
That's all I care
and I know he cares about the whole thing too. But I just want to make sure the board, when they contemplate the action, it's not just the land development for the athletic field improvements, but it also contemplates the building renovations and the building additions.
Thank you, Matt.
Good point. Thanks, Matt. 1F, the proposed action may result in increased erosion, whether from physical disturbance or vegetative removal, including the treatment by herbicides. We're obviously moving grass and lawn, so we have to say there's going to be some small impact. This construction project, like most, involve earthwork, carries the potential for soil erosion. However, the anticipated impact is deemed small due to the construction plans are going to require the sediment erosion control, the SWIP, and prepared in compliance with New York State standards for erosion and sediment control. Additionally, the project won't involve any use of herbicides, so that's why we said small impact on that one. 1G, the proposed action is or may be located within a coastal erosion hazard area. We are not located adjacent to one, so there'd be no impact there. Item 2, so it's a different category. Impact on geological features. The question is, the proposed action may result in the modification or deconstruction or the inhibit access to or unique or unusual landforms on the site, cliffs, dunes, materials, fossils, caves. That answer is no. We don't have any of those geological features, at least in my opinion. So we didn't have to answer subsequent questions there, so we can move quickly to number 3. And the topic there is impact on surface water. The proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other surface water bodies, streams, rivers, or ponds or lakes. And the answer to that question is yes. kind of explained a little bit earlier, but we'll go through them anyway. The proposed action may create a new water body. No, we will not be creating a new water body, so there's no impact there. 3B, the proposed action may result in an increase or decrease of over 10% or more than a 10-acre increase or decrease in the surface area of any body of water. No impact. The project will not increase or decrease surface water for any water body or body of water. So that's no. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions and slow me down.
Okay.
3C, the proposed action may involve dredging of more than 100 cubic yards of material from a wetland or water body. No, we are not dredging anything, so it's an easy no impact. 3D, the proposed action may involve construction within or adjoining a fresh water or tidal wetland or in bed or banks of any other water body. No impact. The project is not within or adjoining a freshwater or tidal wetland. I will go on and expand to this, that we do know that there is a federal wetland further down the hill and away from our site a little bit, but there are new DEC regulations for wetlands that we need to comply with, and so we have filed with them to get their jurisdictional determination for them. That's the first step in that process. So they may come back with something saying, no, we now feel there is wetlands, then we'll deal with the wetland stuff in the buffer zone if we have to. The project is not anticipating or will not go into any wetlands, but sometimes there's a 100-foot buffer zone that you have to respect and then get some DEC approval and mitigation for that, but we don't anticipate it at this point.
So can I highlight that? So that area, which we call colloquially wetlands, by New York State is not a legal wetland. It doesn't have a protected classification.
Correct.
But what you're saying is there's a possibility that the federal environmental DEC would sort of claim jurisdiction over that.
The state, not
The state.
The state would take jurisdiction. Yeah, state DEC.
Oh, state DEC.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But the confusion was I said there is a federal wetland on your site, but it's further
Oh, I'm sorry,
away.
I mixed it up.
Yep.
Sorry,
And
I have it backwards. Right.
yeah.
Okay. So, but even in the case if the state were to say that, notwithstanding the negative declaration here, the remedy for that is already known, what you're saying, the 100-foot buffer, and that's something we are prepared to meet?
We would have to meet, yes. We'd have to.
But I would say we can. We have the space.
Similar to the SHPO process, where they'll say, well, we really would rather see you do this, or this is how we think you should mitigate. They'll dictate the terms of that, okay? And a lot of times, when we're at this level and stage of design, and before we have an approved project from the community, we don't necessarily get those permits ahead of time because we just don't know if it's not worth spending the money ahead of time. So, but we've identified it, that we will have to respect those and follow the state law for the new wetland regulations.
Yeah, I think, as far as I understand it, on the federal side, if there's a buffer to the state, there's new legislation that went in effect, right, this year for the buffer zone?
The new I don't know the exact requirements, but there is new legislation. I know the process, and the first step in the process is assigning them a map showing them where your proposed development is, and they let you know if they feel they have jurisdiction of any. They're basically taking on more responsibility, the state, for the wetland control. And so they'll reply back within, I think it's 4 months or 3 months. That's why we started that first step
Gotcha.
already.
Gotcha.
And so we're waiting for them to respond back. If they feel that they do have some jurisdiction, then we walk the site with them with our wetland biologist and their wetland guy, and we define where that edge is, and then we go from there. If there's an edge there and we're within the buffer zone, then we have to do some mitigation. And that mitigation might just be not to mow a certain area, or it could be more drastic. You just don't know at this point.
So it's not just somebody like just looking at a map and drawing a line. It's actually really ground level, boots on the ground, hands on.
Their initial step is to look on a computer and aerials and older photography and aerial imagery. I don't know how they're going to get there, how they're going to do it. I mean, this is all new grounds for everyone, so we're hoping this is successful. But
there's a real process that potentially behind it. It's just good to know. So.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Can I ask a,
Oh yeah, Teresa.
sorry, did I,
Where's this coming from?
sorry, repeat. I have a hard time hearing.
Teresa, you're going in and out. Do you want to text me your question if it's possible, and I'll
Yes.
ask it? Sorry, because the audio is going in and out.
Yes, can you hear me or no?
Yeah, it just kind of drops in and out.
Okay.
Try one more
I'm
time,
gonna-
though. It sounds okay now.
Okay, I'll try. So I'm sorry, like I said, I can't really hear very well. So you're talking about the wetland and you said that it's not like an official wetland. Is that pretty kind of what you said?
We don't know the classification of the wetland, if they are indeed wetlands right next to our development, or what the distance is from the wetlands. I mean, there's definitely wetlands someplace down that hill, but whether it's on the hill or not, so well, at this point, what we know is that DEC has not identified any wetlands on the site, but we're following up with them per the new regulation requirements, and we're going to see what they come back with, and then adjust as needed. But there may not be any wetlands, so we may be good. But fact of the matter is, we will not be going down, we will not be disturbing any area that's not already been previously disturbed and developed. We're not intending to go down into the woods, clear trees, and down into that sloped area.
Gotcha.
Right. So, but what about runoff? I mean, I hear you say that, that you would create a buffer zone, but is that meant to protect these little tiny pieces of plastic from getting into the water?
So there'll be a stormwater management system to deal with any associated runoff from the development. There'll be, the synthetic turf field is vertically draining down into pipes that are below grade that will then discharge into some type of, we designed it, that's why I'm saying some type. It could be a bioretention pond, it could be a dry pond, it could be different DEC approved practices, but that pond will then filter the water, clean the water, and then let it release it back into the wetland as it naturally did before at a controlled rate, so they're not impacting or causing any erosion. You currently have a stormwater system that discharges in that area and would probably mimic the same one or tie into it before it discharges, but we have to meet the same rates. There's a huge engineering calculations that go in behind all this stuff, and that it's required by the state, and we do this all the time, so we can make sure that we're not negatively impacting the wetlands.
Right, I understand. So when on page 4, I know you're not there, I know you're sort of toward the end, but it talks about this. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's good. It's good now.
Okay. The question at the bottom of page 4, DB, is would the proposed action cause or result in alteration of, increase or decrease in size of, or encroachment into any existing wetland, water body, shoreline, beach, or adjacent area? So I understand that it's not going to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Teresa, yes. Can you
Okay,
mention, I'm sorry,
sorry,
can you just
sorry.
mention again which one you're on, what it's labeled?
It's labeled D2 Project Operations on page 4.
Oh, it's way back in part 1. Oh, sorry, we're all the way at the end of the document. That's all. That's why we're having a hard time
I
finding
know,
it.
but did we spend any time in the beginning of the document?
No, we're looking at sort of the summative aspects of the document that come at the end. But we can look at this. It's fine. Just want to locate where it is.
This detail that I'm bringing up relates to the summative analysis that we're going over. So when we talk about wetlands and we talk about a buffer zone. So I mean, and the reason why I'm asking this question is because I'm concerned about the runoff from the turf field into the wetland and into the general watershed. So on page 4, D2, Project Operations, it says with the proposed action, I won't read the question again, it's at the bottom.
Right, it's marked no. It's B.
Right,
And just to interrupt, so you don't go to D, you have to answer them in order from A to D. At times,
Okay.
if you first answered it, so D2A, if the answer is no, you don't necessarily go down through the rest of them.
right.
But no, but B, you're right, okay, I've been looking at it now too, so but B's, okay, I'm sorry, I confused myself here, so you're right, go ahead.
So my concern is that we haven't really, like, that this document isn't comprehensive in terms of the potential runoff of little tiny plastics from the turf field. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, and I apologize. I'm just trying to understand, because it seems very topical, an analysis. And many community members have expressed concern just like about this specifically. So I'm looking for a more in-depth analysis of how these plastics, you know, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think it's not just me, it's also the whole community really is looking for a more in-depth analysis of the synthetic, you know, of the plastic and the water.
Teresa, can I kind of paraphrase that into two questions? Maybe
Sure.
they can answer. So one of them is, does the state take into account the possible presence of plastic runoff from fields in this document? And number two, just from your experience topically, are there things that we can do, or we are planning to do, or should plan to do, that would mitigate possible presence of plastic runoff from the fields? Is that fair?
Yeah.
That's
Teresa,
good.
does that sound
Thank
good?
you, Alex.
Okay, sure.
Well, the first question, no, the seeker doesn't specifically talk about plastic, synthetic turf like that. It's more of a general, broader approach to looking at this. So the answer is no, they don't pinpoint that.
Gotcha.
Are we doing everything that we can, or what do we know about the plastics, rubber? We do design according to state standards, like I said, with these basins that help, you know, filtrate the water and not only plastics or metals that are captured, but also any other sediments or other pollutants that may get into the water from natural grass, from pavements, from everything, not just the field itself, oils on the pavement and stuff like that. That's all we've normally done. I don't know of any other practices that could put communities' ease to mind.
Can I help just
Sure,
split
of
hairs for a
course.
second on Teresa's question? She specifically mentions plastics. The synthetic turf filaments are plastics and remain in place. And then there are rubber crumb that is used to sort of ballast the field and provide the drainage characteristics and the traction characteristics you look for in performance. Was Teresa interested in leaching of plastics, or was she more interested in rubber crumb migration?
I guess both.
I guess whatever's more likely, you know?
So, and I'm not going to overstep too far, but in my experience, the filtration techniques required by the DC, mandated by the state, have certain micron levels that they're obligated to filter out of the water, which include contaminants that are probably of greater risk than rubber crumb migration or synthetic plastics entering into the water stream. So I think that the filtration practices that the DEC has adopted statewide, that every project of this developmental size is obligated to meet, address the certain size micron, which is the size of the plastic or rubber material that may enter into the stormwater runoff system and are filtered. So I do think that the state practices address that particular concern as it relates to Teresa's question.
Okay, good. You know, Teresa, maybe it's not for tonight because we don't have the data, but maybe before the vote on the 22nd, we can get some data about state practices, about what we will actually be putting in from LA Group and land. Does that sound sensible?
I think that would be helpful, not just for me, but for the community in general.
Yeah.
And so can I just ask one more question?
Sure.
In terms of that, especially if we want to see community support of the synthetic turf, how detailed how many players can we get a thorough and comprehensive analysis from? I know that this is one agency who did this environmental report, but could we go to a wetlands inspector and, are there wetlands experts, or is there an expert in this?
You had mentioned you have a biologist.
We have wetland biologists and environmental department within our company.
Okay, so
But-
LA Group has somebody that we could ask for professional advice, opinion.
Sure,
Okay,
yeah, I don't see why not, yeah.
okay.
I think that would be very helpful, like I said, in terms of just providing the most robust information to the community, especially in a community that really cares about the environment.
Hello?
Yes, huh?
I think what Teresa also is mentioning is, there are a lot of fields that you look around that have wetlands that are adjacent to them because you're building up walls and the wetlands become developed, kind of like what you were saying earlier. Are there any impact studies that we can see of wetlands that are next to synthetic turf fields and any impact that those synthetic turf fields have caused or not caused to those wetlands?
Yeah, that's something we can, that's a good thought. We can sort of add that to the follow-up. Is that fair? Yeah?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay, it's a good thought, David. Thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you, David.
Okay. Teresa, are you good? You can't see us, so I want to key you in. Oh, I guess you can see us. Okay, all right. All right. So, Teresa, if you're good, so we'll move on. But feel free to come in again if you have another
Okay.
question. So, if it's okay, we're going to skip back down to where we were, which was in the part 3, sort of the substantive findings. I believe you had just finished
I think 3D is where I
3D,
finished,
yeah,
so
yeah.
on 3E, okay.
3, correct. Thank you.
All right. All right, so 3E, the question is, the proposed action may create turbidity in a water body, either from upland erosion, runoff, or by disturbing bottom sediments. We're suggesting a small impact, as the construction plans will include the necessary sediment erosion control plans, along with a stormwater prevention plan prepared in compliance with New York State Standards for Erosion and Sediment Control and New York State Stormwater Management Design Manual. Additionally, stormwater basins will be implemented to treat runoff prior to discharge. This will allow sediments to settle out before stormwater enters the existing drainage patterns, further reducing the potential impact of this project on the turbidity of the receiving water bodies. There will be no disturbance of existing bottom sediments as a result of this project.
So just, if I can interject, I think it's helpful for more of an outsider perspective on this. It really addresses Teresa's comment and the concern from the community that you have the New York State DEC regulating the filtration and migration of contaminants from the development site into their watershed. And so it's not just our opinion that we think this is good practice. You have a regulatory agency saying this is the standard of care that you must meet. And so while we cite these, and I think we're just sort of glossing over, it's really important to understand there are regulating agencies that tell you that you need to do this. And that's what we're designing this project to meet those regulatory requirements.
Can I ask you, is that an active process in the sense that, so what you're saying kind of is, it's interesting. It's not that New York State is, no pun intended, downstream of our project. They are, in this case, within the project because they control that sort of, the regulatory domain extends into, as soon as the water drops under the field, their rules or process apply to that. Is that something, and so they inspect that to
both active construction on the job site, while the site is disturbed at its worst condition, to completion of the job site and water migration from the job site filtered through retention basins, through your stormwater system, and into the wetlands offsite. All of that is pre-treated, filtered to meet the New York State DEC's requirements. So yes, it addresses what we've experienced in the industry with other construction projects of similar types where you see a wetland next to a synthetic turf field and that wetland is thriving is an indicator that the DEC practices are indeed working.
And it's not much different, say if you had a parking lot, right? DEC requires us to capture that runoff and treat it and slow it down and get the sediments, the oils, the salts and everything out of that before we discharge it too. So it's very similar. They make us look at the synthetic turf as if it was an impervious system, even though we know it's not, because of they want to be able to clean it and filtrate it as best they can.
Interesting.
So it's not just the turf field, it's everything that we have to maintain sediment, and control. There's different practices, silt fence, there's a construction access that's really big stones and knock off dirt off the the tires of the dump trucks before they leave the site. There's concrete washout areas, so you don't just dump the concrete next to a wetland. You got a specific area, so there's a lot into all these regulations that we need to abide by as professionals, and then we submit it to the state, and then we have to do inspections, and so it's pretty involved. It's very involved.
And there's enforcement, there's DEC compliance. And there's enforcement of those practices. So there's regulatory inspections. You're going to be obligated to hire a stormwater protection monitor during the construction, who, in the event of an intense rainfall, and I can think of maybe the past 2 summers where we had 100-year or 500-year storms. Those were anomalies that aren't necessarily anticipated as part of the routine standard practices of DEC regulations, but that they come out and enforce and monitor and make recommendations to mitigate migration of material into the stormwater stream.
So that's interesting. So if there is a big water event, then you're up for inspection?
They're
then?
obligated to come out within 24 hours, I believe, of a large rain event. And we had, I want to say 6 inspections last summer as a result of abnormal rain events that exceeded the 100-year standards.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, thank you. That's a great point.
So those inspections come out at least once a week, and then furthermore, when I'm here, I do the same thing. Or an engineer does an inspection, so it's definitely observed and
Interesting.
checked.
Thank you.
Alex, I'm sort of keeping track of some of these questions that may rise to the level almost a frequently asked question, because I think that they're underscoring that question and then that response is that it's not just solely your firm doing this. One, you're operating within a regulatory framework, and New York State has a particularly strict one, and I think that will stay, because let's be clear what's happening in our nation at this point. We are holding on to that regulatory framework. So it exists in the evaluation, the review, and then during the construction, et cetera, that regulatory framework stays with monitoring and all the rest set at a high standard.
Yeah.
So I think, Teresa, it's a great question, and I think we can reinforce it with the FAQ, and I think you all understand what I'm saying. In this time and age, for a state to hold on to its regulatory requirements, in this case, is a plus, given there is pressure against that at this point elsewhere, at least in this nation. Mike, please.
There you go.
No, if you could include the citations, I would think that would be good as well, like, just how the process works if folks want more info, because people are very interested.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. So moving on, we're 3G?
3F, I believe.
sorry,
The proposed action may include construction of 1 or more intakes for withdrawal from water, from surface water. No impact. We're not planning on withdrawing any water from any source. 3G, the proposed action may include construction of 1 or more outfalls or discharge of wastewater to surface waters. I got a little confused myself. The difference between F and G was water versus wastewater. And no, we're not proposing any discharge of wastewater. 3H, the proposed action may cause soil erosion or otherwise create a source of storm discharge that may lead to siltation or other degradation of receiving water bodies. I think we've gone through this a few times. We're going to follow the standards and regulations. So it's a small impact. 3I, the proposed action may affect the water quality of any water bodies within a downstream or downstream of the site of the proposed action. Same thing, we're going to follow the stormwater regulations and the SWIP, so we will not be impacting other than small impacts maybe during construction, but that's we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
3J, the proposed action may involve the application of pesticides or herbicides in and around any body, water body. No, we're not proposing any pesticides or herbicides. 3K, the proposed action may require construction of new or expansion of existing wastewater treatment facilities. No, we do not anticipate any expansion of wastewater facilities. Impact on groundwater, the proposed action may result, or this is a new topic, sorry. Item 4, impact on groundwater, the proposed action may result in new or additional use of groundwater or may have the potential to introduce contaminants to the groundwater or aquifer. No, we're not, that's no. Item 5, Impact on flooding, the proposed action may result in development of land subject to flooding. No, the project's not located within a 100-year floodplain, so we don't have any impact on that. Impact on air, the proposed action may include a state-regulated air emission source. No, that's not the case with this project. Item 7, the impact on plants and animals. The proposed action may result in loss of flora or fauna. No, the new improvements are within existing developed area and will not impact habitat. 8 is a new item again, impact on agricultural resources. The proposed action may impact agricultural resources. The answer to that one's no. Impact on number 9, impact on aesthetic resources. The land use of the proposed action are obviously different from or in sharp contrast to current land use patterns between the proposed project and a scenic or aesthetic resource. No, the new improvements are within the existing developed area with the same use. Item number 10, impact on historic and archaeological resources. The proposed action may occur in or adjacent to historic or archaeological resource. We kind of went over this in the beginning. We reached out to SHPO, they provided comments, we addressed them, and then we got a sign-off letter from them. So I started by saying my original answer or suggestion was to be small impact, but then we got the response from SHPO, so now I think it's a no impact because through the regulatory agency, we followed what they considered to be the corrective action or way to move forward.
Gotcha.
Could I ask one question on number 10? The eligibility of the, is it the entrance? It can be on the state preservation, the SHPO?
Yeah, so there's a website that you go to find out this information. When you go to there, that's what triggered us to contact them. It said that the building was eligible. So they have not yet determined that it is on the historic registry, but it's eligible.
Okay.
And so when it's eligible, you have to reach out to them.
Yeah, it sounds like there's, I'm sorry.
Yeah, any building over 50 years old
Right.
is eligible to be listed on the State Historic Preservation.
All our
Office's
houses.
and as part of the SHPO process, we were required to do a visual assessment of all of the houses surrounding the Burke Estate. And so one by one, I walked around the Burke Estate and photographed every single house. And so if one of your community members saw me photographing your house, it really was for
Isn't that a
work
weirdo?
purposes. We did submit that to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they took inventory of the viewpoint from each house. So I took a picture of the house, and I took a picture looking at the Burke Estate from that house. And they made an assessment based upon what they knew the proposed development would be and the visual impact that may have to the property owner. So they did take inventory of that, and they had no further comment based upon our photographic analysis.
Oh, interesting. Can I ask a question about that very thing? Because one of the things, I know lights aren't in the current proposal, but one of the things that came up with when we were talking about lights was that the existing trees around there are all deciduous, and we said, well, maybe as an amelioration, we could consider planting evergreen things, if need be. If we were to plant things like that, would that be, would that have to, that aspect which you're bringing up, the view preservation, would that have to be redone, or where would that fall, kind of?
Well, I mean, with regard to SHPO, they didn't have any comment on it. With regard to being a good community member, good neighbor as a school district to your adjoining property owners, there's certainly mitigation, actions you could take place with vegetative buffers if you chose to do so. I can't remember the name of the one particular drive that I walked up, but it ends in a dead end, and there's a very short end of the field location where a lot of the property sort of backs right up to the Burke Estate, and it seems reasonable to believe that Burnside, that's it. Thank you. Seems reasonable on that side based on the height of the trees. And I would imagine, because I walked through it in the wintertime, there was a semi-clear view of the Burke Estate. Now, you're probably not going to be playing on the field and using lights during the middle of the winter. But on one hand, you may want to consider a vegetative screen on that side to mitigate any particular nuisance they may perceive as a result of their view shed from behind at the rear of their property looking on the Burke Estate.
Okay, great.
So that just from our professional opinion, that's about the only spot that had direct line of sight. And if I'm forgetting a street or a particular property address, I apologize. It was really analyzed, and I think we could provide suggestions if you need.
Okay.
So just a question on that, and I think you mentioned in the beginning, you looked at like everything that could possibly be in the bond, but it doesn't necessarily translate to it being in the bond. And I just wanted to clarify on the lighting, because I know we went back and forth, and it's in the paperwork, so you did study it, and you have kind of the mitigation that you just talked about, but that is not in the bond, correct? So I just wanted to kind of bring that up because I don't want people to think, you said it wasn't going to be in there, why is it in the paperwork? We were just,
Oh, yeah, good point.
everything in just in
Just
case,
in
right?
case.
At the time, we weren't fully established on what was going to be in and
I
out.
think it gives you the biggest flexibility should you decide alternately to put it back into the bond or to make it an à la carte menu of questions. In other words, if you go out to the public and the public finds the most polarizing aspect is the field lighting, and you decide to leave that up to public opinion to decide, you would have needed to do your due diligence
Right.
and analyze the impact. And so we analyzed the entire action in its worst-case scenario, and we provide an opinion based on what the worst-case scenario might be.
Got you, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question that you
course.
was kind of sitting with me for a moment, and what you brought up about trees. You talked about the entryway and the trees, there's going to be some disturbance with trees, and I know in Hastings here, the pollinator pathway has a huge impact on the community. And are there state laws that require non-invasive plantings to be planted around? And as a school board, as a school, how do we partner with these schools to make sure that we're planting, native plants around the community? Because that is a big part of our community here.
Bob, you're...
There's a list of invasive species that if you're a design professional, landscape architect like myself, that not to plant, and we wouldn't plant any of those or wouldn't suggest those. But a lot of times, we would plant native stuff, we'd research it and look into it, but there's no state requirement for what you need to plant back and replace if you're taking down the trees in the front. The landscape architect would propose something, and then you guys can, review it if you want, or if you had suggestions, we'd take those into account.
Yes, I think that we would have to kind of plan with the community on that, because
sure.
pollinator pathways in all the river towns is huge, and I think that we wouldn't want to upset that group by suggesting plants that aren't, within the plants that they want us to.
I think you're absolutely right. I think as a board, that's something we could direct, the district to do, that's what we'd like to see, and that's, I think, easily done, so for sure. It's a good thing to raise. Thank you. Okay, sorry.
Onward?
Where were we?
I think we're on number 11.
Yes.
Impact in open space and recreation. This was a good one. The proposed action may result in loss of recreational opportunities and a reduction of open space resource as designated in any adopted municipal open space plan. No, we're actually, potentially increasing, so that's a good one for us from an impact statement. Number 12, impact on critical environmental areas. The proposed action may be located within or adjacent to a critical environmental area, CEA. Yes, we're adjacent to the Hudson River, which was listed on the website, and the basis for why it's on there is its exceptional and unique character. So now we have to follow the subsequent questions. So 12A, the proposed action may result in a reduction of the quantity of the resource or characteristic which was the basis of the designing of the CEA, and we're suggesting no impact as the project site is located adjacent, but we're not proposed, and the proposed action has no impact on the CEA as the project maintains the same character and function as it previously did, and we're staying on our site. 12B, the proposed action may result in a reduction in the quality of the resource or characteristics which the basis for the designation of the CEA was, and again, no, because we're maintaining the same function and character of the space. Next item is impact on traffic. The proposed action may result in a change of existing transportation systems. No to that one. Impact on energy. The proposed action may cause an increase in the use of any form of energy. Well, this is, again, the worst case. So if we had lights, we definitely have an increase in energy, but if you look further in depth on the websites and information from Seeker, the answer is no, because here per the DEC guidance, the proposed action does not require a new upgrade or creation or extension of substations, energy transmission supplies, nor does it use more than 2,500 megawatt hours of energy, or is the building less than 100,000 square feet area and not likely to have any impacts on energy. So I'm not an electrician or an electrical engineer. That's right from Seeker's website, so that's why it's a no there. So
that's still a no, even if there were lights, which again are not in the bond currently.
Right.
Right, because they're talking specifically about sort of the
the
infrastructure.
Exactly. So the infrastructure that delivers the power, correct?
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, the action is not just the fields, it's the buildings. And the buildings, in fact, would probably use more energy and electricity than any of the LED field lighting if you decided to
Good point.
put that into the referendum.
Thank you.
So moving on to 15, impact on noise, odor, and light. The proposed action may produce sounds above noise levels established by local regulation. We generally say no or small impact on this just for construction equipment for a short-term basis. Backup lights, so to be thorough, we don't really think about during the event, but during construction.
Yeah.
There might be a slight increase as well from noise from the sporting events during night games, because now you don't have night games. Again, looking at the overall action if you did the lights. So we think it's a small impact. 15E, the proposed action may result in lighting, creating sky glow brighter than existing area conditions. So we did a photometric study modeling the proposed, for the proposed project, and the light will not spill onto adjoining properties. But inherently, there's going to be a different glow from the lights out there. But we will be following the dark sky standards to mitigate that the best we can. So there will be a small impact.
You mean during
that one.
construction?
No, this is, if the lights are part of the project.
If there were to be lights,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
again, those are
again.
not in the bond. Gotcha, okay.
And number 16, health on human health, or impact on human health. Proposed action may have an impact on human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants. No to that answer. Number 17, consistency with the community plans. The proposed action, the question is, the proposed action is not consistent with the adapted land use plans. No, there's no impact. Consistency, I guess I got that one twice.
Oh, it's like, yeah, it's twice. Right.
Why did I screw that up there?
The second question is, this project is inconsistent with the existing.
Oh, yeah. The proposed project is inconsistent with the existing community character, and that's a no.
Gotcha. Okay.
I got
So-
confused myself there.
So we went through the third phase of the document, which is kind of a summative part. Is there anything that, in your experience, that we should go back to in either the first two sections? Because I read through it, and this looked like the part that's kind of most germane to the discussion tonight. But are there any things that were not brought up in this that we should cover?
Nothing that comes to mind. I mean, in my experience, the big things are usually traffic and lighting, and then some of those things aren't really applicable here, some are. But traffic's usually a big one, usually because we have big parking lots associated with these type of fields, like 200, space parking lots and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But I would strongly urge that everyone goes through both documents, for any type of errors or revisions or something they see that's inaccurate. Again, we fill out part one based off our experience, also online resources, just general information we can gather up online in documents, but,
Okay, so I know we're not all here tonight because we have some board members that are sick. But I think that we've already talked about some aspects of follow-up that we're going to pose via email or whatever additional questions for LA Group or LAN. And it would be good for us to go through this, and maybe we'll hear from the community with some questions, and then we can just forward those on. And then our next meeting, April 22nd, is where we can sort of pick up the threads. Matt, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the way that we've coordinated with your legal counsel is today is a day that we answer your questions that you may have.
Oh, okay.
And so if there's follow-ups, we can certainly provide that. But in order to keep on track to maintain going to a referendum in June, on the 17th, the Board of Ed would need to make a determination about the environmental impact of the project at your next board meeting on April 22nd. So based on the information that we provided in advance of this meeting, based on this conversation that we've had today, and any follow-up information, any questions that you may have or develop between now and April 22nd that we can answer, that is your chance to ask those questions and then make a formal determination by your next board meeting.
Yeah, sounds good. So we're sort of like taking information in, seeing what questions we have, what the community has, and then over the next 2 weeks, we can follow up so that on the 22nd, we're in a position to make a determination. So,
Now, if I may suggest this procedurally here, since we often have cover memos and we don't hear, I think a cover memo and a transmission, it could come from me if you're fine, just stressing that this is an all-inclusive analysis. It doesn't define what the scope of the project is. because this freestanding, I think, could be confusing since it's in the public record.
Oh,
I
gotcha.
apologize, I didn't catch that sooner,
Yeah.
just to put that clear. I mean, we've brought it up in questions, we've made it clear here in the minutes and all, but I think it'd be helpful to have that attached here. So
Gotcha.
Melissa, do you and I can work and post that tomorrow?
Okay,
Just a simple cover memo.
that's a good idea. One question I do have for Rena, we have the new design here for the entryway that's SHPO approved, we can say? Is that
Yes.
accurate? Okay. I know we've talked a lot about, from the original design by PBDW, the cafeteria, we've talked about the aspects of value engineering it. I don't know if it's changed what it looks like in any way, but would we have an updated rendering that we could get before the 22nd of it? You know, is it different at all, or?
We have an advanced design on the cafeteria, so I think that's remained as is. I mean, obviously, once we get into design, everything will develop more, and all of the input about any revisions will be incorporated, but we haven't started on that process yet.
Okay. So I guess that's one thing that we should just follow up on community-wise, that we make sure that we have a rendering, so we have sort of a canonical rendering of what we're talking about, so everybody knows, you know, we're on the same page.
Yeah, I could just add, I mean, I think bringing any of these to the next level of design is something that we could do now, or you know, you can see how the community votes and could go into later. So I think that's something that we'd be happy to get into earlier if we want to, and if the board wants to. So
Okay.
just add that.
Could I just, you've talked about it before, but we have had a lot of correspondence and people writing in about the glamorous cafeteria. Why is it 2 stories? Why glass? And I think you've worked with Alex on some of our questions, but specifically on the 2-story, could you just kind of drive home as the architects on, it's not, you know, to make it bigger and more beautiful. It really is the linchpin that you free up the space for congestion, et cetera. Could you give, you know, your kind of professional opinion on that aspect of it?
Sure. I know I don't have the slides with me, but I think everyone's familiar enough. I mean, I think the hardest thing to comprehend about bond and what we're proposing is that the major point of the project is to get the cafeteria out of the 3rd floors of the Washington wing so that we can reprogram the 3rd floor of the Washington wing with classrooms that it's intended for and that will serve the school. So I think it's very easy to just see the kind of 2 images of the cafeteria and of the entry and forget the whole genesis of why those occur. But really, you know, the whole point of the bond is to serve that additional classroom space in the place where it's most needed and makes sense the most in the building. And so we've kind of taken and I commend the board for encouraging us to do that as well, the kind of long-term view to say, okay, we're not just going to build the extra classrooms that we need, we're going to think about how can we do this holistically and comprehensively in the best way possible. So I just want to kind of preface by saying that because it is very easy to just get distracted on the 2 images of the new additions, but the crux of the bond is that original cause for the new classroom space on the 3rd floor. With regards to the cafeteria addition and the double-story height of it, they're kind of, it's twofold, I think. One is there's the cafeteria on the ground level of the courtyard space, and then the connection to the main level of the high school entry, right? So those are at different levels, and we're bringing one down to bringing, you know, people down from the main high school entry lobby into the cafeteria on the courtyard space. The courtyard space also really activating it, as we've talked about, kind of the heart of the building as this main program space, and encouraging that visual connection, similar to what we did here with Hillside, that visual connection from, you know, the transition from eating to play. So, you know, eating in that courtyard space and greenery, the greenery that's around there, and then out into the play yard, where is the play area for the middle school, high school. So some of that is just the glazing enhancing that connection. We did actually study having a sloped roof to reduce the amount of glazing on the exterior side, and it led to some very complicated geometry that probably would have increased the cost and complexity of the project. So it actually was much simpler to bring across a flat roof and be able to maintain that with with the exterior being kind of the double-story height. So we did study bringing it down, and just because of the, we're using 2 walls of the existing building and then building out the other 2 walls, resolving all of those, keeping the kind of glazing from the current exterior 2 walls as well, the windows there, just resolving all of that in a way that would transition down to a single story ended up being much more complex than the kind of simple double story form that we have now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask, since we're on the topic of the glass, because it's been just mentioned colloquially that it's a thermally wasteful product, it's not efficient, things like that. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I remember just from my own house, when I was putting in new windows, I remember going and looking at the R value of the windows, and it was like higher than the R value of my walls or something like that. That's my house, but can you speak at all to that aspect of efficiency and glasses, especially the glass we're going to use, its status as an energy efficient or material?
Yeah, I'll say we're still in the concept design phase, right? Nothing's been taken to additional levels of design where we've specified the exact system and glazing type or whatnot, but that's something that we can obviously take input on and incorporate into what we want. Obviously, there are more efficient glazing systems and less efficient glazing systems. I think as a standard practice, we'd like to start with something that's more efficient, but I think even regardless of that, the first thing before you talk about kind of efficiency of different systems is also just understanding building orientation. That's the biggest driver of your building efficiency, and the glazing that we have is on the north side of the school. That's going to give you your most even lighting, and that's going to be your kind of least solar heat gain area. So it is capturing the glazing on the most efficient side of the building.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it also be accurate to say, these buildings are, what, 200,000 square feet, something like that, in total?
In total,
Yeah.
about, just less than that.
And obviously, we've talked about the age of them, that this cafeteria would clearly be, at the room by room, sort of be at the top end of how efficient the building is, right? Judging by all the other windows and all the other aspects, which are 100 years old or plus, right? So it wouldn't be sort of the leaky part. So that would be accurate to say?
Yes, I think that's something that we take care in design of how our envelopes are constructed, and making sure that anything that's built new is definitely exceeding standards for kind of a leaky building, right? I think a lot of
exceeding standards from 100 years ago.
Yes,
okay.
a lot of our work is repairing buildings from 100 years ago that leak, and how do we improve those? Yeah.
Jody, sure, of course.
Glad that you went back to where this all started, because I'm thinking of when we started this project and when you presented to us and had gone around speaking to various groups within the school. I think somehow in this process we've gotten so far away from why we're doing this and the needs of the district. And I say that just because we just continue to get letters that repeatedly talk about the fancy glass cafeteria and the front facade of the building, but especially the cafeteria, and this idea that people have that we're just trying to build this beautiful, architecturally beautiful space, and that we're just spending a lot of money at a very, very difficult time for people to imagine spending money. And I think the piece about what the needs are for students, for academics, for classrooms, the increased need that we have now, the increased special ed requirements and needs, that we can't possibly meet in the building as it was. And somehow I feel like that keeps getting lost in the beautiful building that we're building. And I think we have to really be very clear with what the purpose is of this, and that there's a serious, serious need. In this bond, there are many significant needs, as we know, in terms of what's happening in the buildings. But this is a real need for, it's like I kind of think in my head of the budget being about sort of teaching and learning and students, and the bond being about the physical facility that we have and that we're going to have hopefully going forward. But we're in a bad place, and I think this becomes the best way. It's not just to have a fancy cafeteria. I think back to when we went through it for this space, and why do we need a fancy cafeteria? But and anyway, I appreciate your going back to that, because I think it keeps getting lost in the process, and especially in an effort to make a case for why we shouldn't do this or why we shouldn't pass a bond. I think there will be parts of it that people will be able to decide which parts they're interested in, but it just seems, as I've wrestled with this, and I've really wrestled with this around the money and the cost and how can we do this in the community, I think it's going to be really important that people understand. And it feels like we're always going back, but I think we have to go back to basics about why this started and what we found and how we meet those needs and how the needs have changed over the years from when my kids were in school or when a lot of other people had kids in the schools, and what the demands are for classrooms and space. And, we do have to keep making that
I think,
very clear
we've
to
talked
people.
about it,
Good
like this
point.
board is well prepared over the next 6 to 8 weeks, whatever, to be totally available for those topics. Marie?
No, I completely agree with you, Jody. The other thing that I think is really compelling, and I would like the architects to kind of weigh in, just is the idea that building systems are, in disrepair. The equipment has achieved and it been way beyond its useful life, right? So we're going to see more emergencies. And the cost market, right? So I know on the one hand, things are getting expensive for everybody, but this is not going to be a cheaper project next year, correct? It's only going to get more expensive. We will incur and deal with emergency repairs, more costly. I don't even want to kind of go there, but it's not going to get any better. And then I think the compelling part is that we get reimbursed currently, and that could be in jeopardy come next year. But if you could speak to the costs aspect and rising costs in the market.
Sure. Every year, there's inflation. And so building materials and the cost of labor increases year over year. We try to provide all of our clients with the appropriate provisions in our budgeting documents to forecast and protect you from cost overruns related to escalation. I think, you're hearing about it all over TV right now, tariffs and the impact that could have on construction. And so, there are real threats to the industry, to the construction field, if you will, that could impact the cost of the project. And I think we've made the appropriate recommendations to accommodate cost overruns. And there is scalability in the scope of work to make sure that the core goals of the Board of Ed and the school district and the community are met. And yeah, you are addressing a lot of your infrastructure needs. There's, if I remember correctly, over $7-8 million in just infrastructure needs between the two buildings. And how you decide to focus that allocation, most of it was building systems at Hillside. I think there was, oh gosh, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to go off memory here, but $3 million of BCS and 5-year plan improvements identified at Hillside. And then over here at Farragut, roughly $5 million of capital improvements just related to BCS conditions, $4 million on MEP improvements. So those MEP systems probably are pre-existing the current code requirements. I shouldn't say probably, they are, and they wouldn't meet modern code requirements for ventilation, for fresh air, for other mechanical requirements. So you should address them. It is the indoor air quality of your learners, of your teachers, and the instructional environment that is crucial to giving them a thriving collaborative learning environment. So invest in it and perpetually invest in it. We've learned in working with Hastings, there's a one stop and then a big gap between the next round. And a lot of our other clients are constantly reinvesting in building systems and capital improvements on a more regular and routine basis so they can keep up with the modernization of their buildings. And that has really stagnated here. And in our experience working with other clients, both around this area, and I've heard this, Hastings' different motto, but it doesn't mean you have to live with outdated technology or outdated building envelopes or building systems. I think there's a real need here to modernize your instructional environments just for the betterment of learning, but also to keep up with the energy consumption of outdated systems to provide healthier, safer learning environments.
Yeah, it's a very
Thank
good
you.
point. Thank you. One of the things that we brought out in the presentation, and something we can turn back to, is, even on a bond total, there's been a significant underutilization of capital expenditure in this district over the past 30 years. And it's not even close. But even breaking down the money that was spent, apart from Hillside, very, very little, small fraction, which we can enumerate, which we've gone over, was spent in those in those 5 buildings, technically, down there. The youngest of which is almost 100 years old. So we can go back to that, and that's, you raise an interesting thing about indoor air quality and sort of the human ecology of the people that have to work in these buildings and spend their childhoods in these buildings. When we had the first meeting, not with you guys, sorry, when the schools first opened up, gave a small talk at the back to school night for the parents, and I had been reading a book that was about the sort of architectural transformation of schools in New York City. There was an architect whose name escapes me at this time. But at that time, one of the things that he was building for was that, and you guys might remember this if you were there, school children, the turn of the century in New York City, and I'm not equating it to now, but because the lights were gas, the children would get sort of the lack of oxygen during the day, and they'd have to stop class, open the windows, and the kids would do calisthenics in the room to get oxygenated because of the gas lighting. And again, it's not not Oliver Twist here. But your point, the human ecology of, again, the staff and the kids, the staff who spend 25, 30 years in these buildings, the kids who spend their entire childhood in these buildings, it's a real issue, and it's a concern, and we are behind on all those sorts of topics that you mentioned. So they're small each individually, but they add up to a great importance for a great number of people. So thank you for raising that point.
Just one of the things I wanted to outline too is of the $8 million of the capital improvement projects that we have outlined here, we have $1 million in for masonry restoration, which only accounts for 25 to 30% of your masonry restoration at that building. That's just doing the worst, the things that are in the worst condition. So things aren't going to get better. Things are only going to continue to deteriorate. So you really do have to, put the money into the capital improvements, or else all these spaces that, we create and we renovate within the building, then, they could get damaged as well. So we need to make sure that we're keeping up with the building envelope as well.
Yeah, that's also a good point. I feel like this year, it's like a preview of what's to come, in the sense that, we had one major failure, we had several smaller failures, significant monetarily, but it's almost like, I feel like with your car, something breaks and you're kind of like, well, it's just a one-off thing, but at some point it is what it is, and I think we're getting a preview. I'm not saying that the same thing's going to happen next year, but the outlook is for similar challenges facing this district and these boards to come. So it's a point well taken. Thank you. Are there any other questions for everyone here tonight before we wrap this part up?
I have one question.
Sure.
So given the potential of increased building material cost with the tariff war, are you keeping the proposed cost for this project the same, or are you thinking of growing them a bit?
In the budget document that we provided to the school district, there is a 10% contingency for the construction of the project. There is a 12% escalation factor, and that is around $5.5 million of contingency money to deal with what has been talked about as 20 to 25% increase on building materials that will have increased costs due to tariffs. So I do feel that we've made an appropriate recommendation before we were aware of the tariffs to protect you against cost overruns that could potentially be on the horizon. There could be things that come up that we don't expect, like tariffs, but we believe that our budget document has the appropriate scalability in the scope of work, and things like parts of the project that have not been designed yet or have been discussed. There is still options to reduce the cost impact to the school district even within the design that we have not even discussed today. You know, whether you wanted to do terrazzo on the floor versus VCT is a tremendous cost decision. And I think that's something that when you hire a construction manager, which we have talked about doing, and we start to forecast the cost of the project with another party, that we'll have to take into consideration options to provide the bidders that will make sure that the project goals can remain whole, we can deliver the project we promised to the community. So I do think, to answer your question, that $5.5 million over the course of a $38 million referendum is a adequate provision to deal with any potential tariffs or costs, forces that we are foreseeing in the industry right now.
It's a great question, Teresa.
Just from experience with Maureen, myself, and others, the board approves it, you get into the process, and then there's constant adjustments all the way. And anyone who was on the board through the Hillside process, I wasn't here, but I was in that process in 2 other districts in different state, but similar process, that there's going to be constant adjustments and all the rest and moments to consider savings. And as Alex has put out quite clear in a lot of documents, the first tax bill hits not till 2029, and there's also other flexibility built into this along the way. But it is quite standard, full point, repeated in a project like this, as you commit to a level, and then you're constantly having to modify within that as the project proceeds. And the board is actively involved in that, having to vote at many key points on any work changes, et cetera.
I'd also add, oh, now I forgot my point. Oh, no, I remember my point. To Teresa's point, sorry, backing up. You know, when we chose land over the summer, one of the really nice substantive things that you guys did was your accuracy in budgeting. You had data on how well you budgeted, and that was across a lot of complex projects as well. And it's the breadth of the organization and your familiarity with school environment as a sort of speciality. It's there. So I appreciate the question, Teresa. I appreciate the answer, and you know, I just had additional confidence that we had from the start, and it's sort of been true all along. So, you know, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I just had one thing, and it's sort of a little bit of a curveball, but for your experience with the fields, we learned through one of our meetings with the community, there's legislation possibly banning
I have the answer on that.
fields, turf fields, and like taking care of existing. So I just was wondering what kind of like you might be seeing in the market, because that's what.
No, I haven't heard of, you know, the banning. I mean,
Yeah, there's
I
a-
always hear rumors.
Proposed
I mean,
legislation,
it always,
yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a bill in committee. The likelihood of it coming out is not high. And it's coming from a source, with all due respect to the source, that often brings that forward. But I've been checking on that actively through a variety of sources, and full respect to the concerns raised by that bill, but it's in committee and not likely to come out.
Okay. The fact that you didn't hear about it is probably promising.
yeah.
So, all right, we're good. We're good. Rena, Bob, Matt, Danielle, thank you very much for being available, and then we'll follow up through Bill. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Okie doke. Let me just get board docs up here. Moving on to finalizing referendum language for the bond vote. So, Maureen, you're going to take us through the document here, or? Oh, actually, it's. Are we making? How we? Thank you all.
Thanks. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Just give you the clicker. So are we moving on to, so we have listed next the finalizing referendum language. Are we staying there? We're going to the budget discussion.
No, we're going to do this.
Well, no, we're going to do the B, right? Finalizing
sorry?
referendum language?
Yeah, and then maybe at that point, before we go to budget, maybe if the students present, come back to budget.
Okay,
Does that make
so we'll
sense?
You're
do B
okay?
now.
But we should stay with bond.
Yes,
closure.
we'll do B now.
Or you can stay, we'll keep going. All right, so Maureen's up.
Okay, so.
Are we doing the bond language? Is that-
Yes, yep.
I really feel like we need all the board members here to do that, no?
Well, we're not,
You're not
You're not
agreeing to
voting.
tonight, we're just
It's
talking
a
about.
preliminary discussion.
Yeah, it has to be on the agenda for next time, the structure of it. So we're just,
we're not really, we're talking about the structure, because what's going to happen is, pending our approval, we're going to then charge legal counsel to come back with the actual language. We're not actually talking about the actual language, right? We're just talking about,
we're talking about the structure, right?
Right.
And we're working off of the last budget that the board.
Yeah, I would
discuss.
recommend you start into the discussion, and between now, though many of us are away, between now and the 22nd, you could have a discussion between, but you're at quorum, the board, I think, should do the work and have the discussion and see what questions there may be. Because otherwise, you, in the same meeting, you have to vote on this, you're discussing it, plus we don't have the time for the legal.
Right, well, the bond
Review.
council has to construct
Yeah.
the language, so.
Yeah. So I would
it's
suggest you
different.
get into it as far as you can at this point.
okay, so, you want to present, or we?
Yes,
Okay.
so I mean, I think the board, from the onset of discussing the project, there was some discussion around breaking up the bond proposition, the bond proposal to separate propositions. And as we think about the project, we've kind of discussed it as three somewhat distinct parts. I mean, at one point, I feel arguably the addition could be considered, within the building scope, but I think because we have a lot of concern about ensuring that the building condition items, some of them relate to work we would like to potentially do now with the Farragut flood renovation, that we need to ensure that those parts of the project are separate, and in the event that there were be people, some concern about the addition being voted down or things of that nature. So I think at different times I've heard the board discuss it either being broken down into two parts. I think currently we're looking at breaking up the bond into three parts, one of which is what we call the building condition survey items, and those include things that were discussed a bit earlier, MEP, masonry work at both buildings. And the way, when you see it on the referendum, we've spoken a lot about, we know what the overall budget was, and then there's the hard construction cost, and then the things, as Matt discussed tonight, such as contingency and escalation, and soft costs related to engineering and architecture and construction management of the project. When you break up the referendum, all those costs have to be baked into each proposition, right? Because those are true costs, and they're going to be part of the total bond cost. So currently, the thinking is to break up into three propositions, as I mentioned, the first of which would be the building condition survey work. And when you add the contingency, price escalation, and soft costs into what we call hard construction numbers, that brings up that total to about $11.3 million or so, a little less than $11.3 million. Again, that is for maintaining the safety and the functioning of our buildings and regulatory compliance. The second question would be for the Farragut building addition, as well as the renovation of the current cafeteria to add 7 classrooms back, as well as the front entryway of the Farragut, and that would be question number 2. Now, the way these would be structured would be that in order to vote affirmatively for question 2, you have to vote affirmatively for question 1. And this is not an unusual structure. Most districts, when they have critical infrastructure work, that one kind of can stand on its own vote, but anything, the propositions 2 and 3 would then be contingent on people voting support the 1 and 2 first. So 2 would only be approved if the BCS work were approved, and then the cost of that with all the soft costs and contingencies would be $19 million for the additions and renovations of classroom space, because it's two additions and a renovation of one of our floors. And then question 3 would have the fields and the site work for the Burke Estate. And again, question 3 can only be approved by voters if they approved 1 and 2.
1 and 2?
1 and 2. Because I think as we've spoken, or there's been some discussion, we feel as though there was a time in which those building additions were going to be included with like the BCS, because we think some of the renovations of classrooms is more critically important than, some of the field work in terms of the needs of the district. So again, you'd have to vote for 1 and 2. They would have to pass an order for 3 to even if you had the votes to support 3, if 1 and 2 didn't pass, that wouldn't pass either. And the cost of doing the fields with the contingency, soft costs, and escalation is roughly $8.2 million. Again, reminders, about $6 million in construction costs, and there's another $2 million or so, which are for all the contingencies Matt discussed, as well as the soft costs. So, currently the thinking is that that would be the way the referendum would break down, and we would then direct the bond council to prepare the language, which then you would have to vote on the April 22nd meeting. First you'd be voting on the SECRA resolution, and then then you would follow it up by voting on the language that goes on the referendum.
Okay.
So that's the discussion tonight about the way it's broken down, what's included in the referendum. I mean, it's not to say, I'm just saying, based upon the last discussion about what was still in play, and then how that breaks up.
Okay. So to start with, are there any questions or comments?
I mean, I guess I just wanted to, observe the 3 parts versus 2, right? Which is a change from what we had prior discussed, but that also has, and you alluded to it, Maureen, that has an insurance piece related to the flood that we have to kind of front the money. So it's not the money's not in here, but we need it on hand.
Correct. To do the work.
And so that's a big reason why we broke out into a third
Yes.
category. So that we have to prove that we have the money in hand in order for that work
For
to
the building
continue.
permits and things.
Permits. And otherwise, if we didn't, we would risk a huge timeline and a delay
Yes.
to the flood project. So I just
Exactly.
kind of wanted to give some of that background on why the change to add kind of the building work separately, because I would have preferred to see it all together, but we have a fiduciary responsibility, given that we know all of this, that we break it out.
Yes. So, as you're aware, the restoration of the Farragut wing is still ongoing, and because there are things that, because of the age of the building and because of the project itself, there are aspects of the restoration that will include upgrades to code compliance, and we're working that through New York State and with the permitting and all the rest. Now, with New York State, although insurance, until in order to kind of start the work, we have to demonstrate that we have funding for the work, and there's an insurance piece. And again, the insurance may just take longer to provide the money, but while we need to do some of these upgrades, which are, they gave us a value for a lot of the work, and then there's things in which the state is now requiring us to do that go beyond that just the timing of that, it's better if we have we can demonstrate in the permitting process, you have to demonstrate that you actually have the money to take on the work. So without having that bond vote, there would be, some funding gap while we wait for the insurance to kick up the rest of the money. And it would be really, interestingly enough, some of that work was already being considered for the bond in that area. So we were able to, keep it in there, and that's some of the MEP work that was already slated to be paid. But how we envision it is that we would then pay it, or be able to demonstrate that we have the funding. And then when the insurance, it allows us to get the permit and not delay the process any further for completing the work there. So that it is critical, and if it were to fail, that would have an impact of being able to open up that building in the time frame we would like to open it back up.
Yeah. I also think it's a fair thing. I mean, we talked a lot about how, you know.
But it's not, only a portion of it, it's not the entire amount, it's just
for
a
sure.
small portion.
By having a three-part bond, we talked a lot about how sort of the ultimate form of local democracy is putting the bond up. And I do think breaking it up in these clearly separable buckets makes it a very clean process. You know, we can go out and make the best case that we can, give people the information they need, and it will inevitably be a fair representation of where the community's at. And that's fair. David?
When it comes to the language that's on this, like question 2, Farragut building addition and classroom renovations, is that the finalized language, or is that what we're talking about right now?
The way the referendum has to be listed, it says detailed, it tries to give a general understanding of what that referendum, that question would cover. So it likely would be a little bit more detailed than that, but again, because it's on a.
That's not the final language.
No, that's not the final language.
Because what I'm hearing like what we're talking about is that the real need in question 2 is instructional space.
Yes.
So I think leading with instructional space.
Oh, that's a good point.
I think is more vital, and then having, you know,
Could you-
wing
Gotcha.
addition.
If the board, I'm just saying, if not, I could write it down, but if you wanted to just, because I think I was just trying to break it up just for discussion purposes, but I think, to your point, that would be a better way to describe it
I
on the
agree.
ballot.
I agree.
So if you have any ideas about how that language should be, then the bond council can put that together.
And that's not tonight, we can.
No,
as we- right.
No, but I was just saying if there,
Right, no,
like
it's a
that,
very
that's a good.
It's a very good observation, because one of the critical misunderstandings is that, as Jody said as well, they were just doing this as a standalone upgrade, but your point is absolutely the fundamental here. I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, and then for question 3, I mean, is turf on the agenda, or is it just the updating of the fields, whether it will be turf or grass, or we're going with turf, like?
Well, no, we would have to specify
We would have to
in the
specify,
question,
okay.
and currently, the budget there reflects the artificial turf.
Okay,
budget,
that's
yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
That's it, thank you.
Oh, no, good point, though. Thank you for catching that.
Can you repeat that,
Which part?
Maureen's answer?
For
Oh,
question
current-
2 or question 3?
The last question you answered, that asked, sorry.
Oh,
So-
so you're saying that, you're
You can answer, yeah.
saying that question 3, as it's posed here with that total, $8 million, is specified for the turf fields. So there's no,
Okay.
yeah, because David had asked, would that be either turf fields or some upgrade of grass, meaning that money, could it be used for that? And Maureen's point is that it has to be specified, it cannot be open-ended in that way.
Okay.
So is
And
that-
what if we come up with another alternative? Can we come back and redo the language before the vote?
No, it's not.
I think at this point, that the
We're
vote is.
putting turf
the
forward,
next-
right?
yeah.
That's what's
I think
happening,
that's,
right?
unless, you
This
Yeah,
has to
we-
be decided now so that we can vote on the 22nd, right?
Right, I mean,
Yeah.
we had talked, I mean, it's, at this point, I mean, my recommendation is that the board commit to the turf approach, artificial, and go down the path and see where we land, because we do not at this point have an alternative that I could in good conscience recommend to you for the taxpayers of Hastings. We don't, I mean, the natural process, if that's where we go back to, we'd have to, talk about what that would require to keep the fields in a playable condition. It also would have the impact of less usage, all the things we faced. The other alternatives that are out there, we don't have a proven model within a public school environment anywhere to point to, and then we're asking taxpayers to take quite a significant multi-million-dollar risk on what at this point in a public school context is not proven. That's not a comment on how good or not those options are, just, I don't think, if the board's willing to do that, but I think we decided in the last meeting to take this approach, to give this your vote option.
So when you say not proven, I know that means that there's nowhere in this country that There's
Within a public school setting, and particularly then within New York State, we cannot competitive bid, would not be eligible for any reimbursement funds, so that's 47% factor. And as good as the ideas may be later, and we've looked at this quite thoroughly, and back in December, we in the public record put our concerns, we've continued to talk with people to sort it out, but you can't point to a place where it's getting used within the public school regulatory financing framework. If I were sitting in an independent school with private donors willing to help float this, it might be a different discussion. If I'm sitting in higher ed with private donors willing to float it, it'd be a different discussion. But here, this is going to taxpayers to say, you know, will you foot the bill on something where we cannot point to any examples? So let me go into the artificial turf realm. In other communities not far from here have tried to go with alternative fill without much of a proven case. It being quite an expensive mistake. And so, but I think structuring it this way will make the case and the voters will vote. And if they choose not to have the artificial turf option here in Hastings, we'll, go back to the drawing board and sort out what we can do.
Can I say something?
Of course.
I absolutely understand what you're talking about, Bill. I think we as a board understand that, what the rules are around bidding for jobs in a public school, and that alternative companies do not meet the requirements. But when you talk about, or not you, when we talk about the community taking a risk on something, we're also taking a risk on the negative impact on the environment and the potential negative health, long-term health problems from the turf. So we're at a risk from any angle. Not cost per se, but from health and climate. I would really like us to put some more money and time, not necessarily before the vote on the 22nd, I know that's not possible, into a complementary but different climate analysis that really dives deep into runoff and chemicals in the air and in the water and in the soil from plastic turf. I, as a taxpayer in Hastings-on-Hudson, would put my money toward that. And I really believe that our taxpayers want that if they're going to put their money toward it too. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. Thank you.
We received a survey as a board. I don't know the sanction of the survey. That was a student survey that was
today.
sent
Yeah.
out. Can we talk about this just for like a
Sure.
second? Are we allowed to talk about it?
I mean, it was submitted by a resident. It was simply a resident doing
It was a
that,
resident,
and
so-
a parent doing that on their own volition. It was completely separate
Right, so we
from
don't
the
know,
district
we don't
in
know
any
like
way.
the validity of this.
It's
This
totally
This
a
wasn't a
separate-
school sanctioned survey.
No, not at all.
But there
This
was a
totally
survey that went
independent,
out to that we were told went out to athletes, and so far there's 304 respondents. I'm saying this because I always advocate for what the students want, because I feel that the students deserve to have a voice in the game of the school that they are in and building and are going to graduate from. So there are 303 respondents to this survey as of now. It's live and it's going. And 260 of those responses from students say they want turf fields. So the quick math on that is, I don't know, 85, 90%, something like that. So I understand the community's input, and I understand exactly what Teresa is saying, right? But when we have 90% of students, and in a survey that only 300 people have responded to so far, but an overwhelming majority of students are saying that athletes are saying that the surface that they want to play their games on are turf, I don't think we can refute that data point and discount what the students are asking for here. And I think that we have to really look within ourselves to think that, yes, we are the taxpayers, but we are doing this in service of children, and we are doing this in service of the athletics of this community. And
But David,
yes.
my daughter was probably one of those athletes who voted yes for the plastic turf. My daughter at age 13 has no care in the world for potential lower leg injuries while playing on this field. She thinks that's hilarious that could even happen. She doesn't care about the environment as much as I would love her to. She's just not thinking big picture. She's not analyzing from different lenses. So we can't place this decision in the hands of teenagers.
I'm not placing it in the hands of teenagers, but I'm saying that this is a part of a decision. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want so badly to vote yes for plastic turf. On Sunday, my daughter, I know I'm speaking about my child, but I'm being transparent about that, was revved up to go to her soccer game. And we in the house were desperate for her to go and run around at her soccer field, at her soccer game. We got an email from Rivertowns United saying, if your child plays on grass, their game is canceled. If your child plays on turf, their game is on. So as a mother, right, I'm an environmentalist and a person who really cares about chronic health problems. I'm really stuck because I want my daughter to play on Sunday, and she could play if her game was scheduled on turf. I am all for increased hours on fields. I'm all for athletes. I'm all for sports, especially in this age of, the mental health crisis that we're in for teenagers. But we can't deny that there are real downsides to synthetic turf.
Teresa, can I chime in a little bit? Respectfully of all your views here, I think those are, and taking into account where David's at, I think those are all part of the process of voting. This is an engaged community. I don't think there's anybody that suffers from a lack of information or thought about it. So I think what David's point is that it deserves to be put to a vote. And I don't think the things you're raising can't happen in the process of the vote. I don't think they have to be sort of sequestered in the process of deciding if there's going to be a vote. I think sort of your needs and what David is raising as the needs of the students can both be met in that process. And I think it would be, I can only imagine it's going to be, sort of the hottest topic and the most information about it. Does that sound fair? I mean, we don't have to debate it, but
it sounds fair, and I appreciate the robust dialogue around it. I feel it's important for community members to know that I am wrestling with this even being on the ballot. I totally believe in democracy, and I believe that everybody has a right to vote for what they want. But when I feel, based on the research I've done, that this is not in the best interest of the environment or the health of our children, I have a hard time. I'm wrestling with it, and I want to be transparent about it.
That's very fair. I think that that's something that we can absolutely plainly debate over the course of the next 2 months. I also think it helps that this is on its own question. It's not tied to other things, it's not leveraged by other things. It's very, I think there's a lot of clarity to it. So I think that, from my point of view, I would agree with David that, and I think we should make that survey public, by the way, so everybody can see it.
Well, it's not
But
our
it's
survey.
not a
but
specific survey.
I'm sorry?
It's an email.
It's an email. It's in our
to the board.
emails. Well, if we're going to bring it up subsequently, we should.
I know, Teresa, it's hard, you say your 13-year-old daughter doesn't have a care in the world, and I understand that line of thinking, and I really want to, my goal is to really push your line of thinking. These teenagers are community members too, And just because they can't vote doesn't mean that they don't have a say in what's going on here. And they're going to talk to their parents, and they're going to convince their parents. And I understand that it impacts the over 18 and the homeowners, right, in our taxes, but we can't discount youth voice.
Well, Dave, you know, I sort of agree with you, and I sort of don't. I hear what Teresa's saying. I have also been wrestling. I don't love the idea, but I do think that Bill has delved into this and has, in his recommendation for what's best for the needs of the district, I think he's recommending to the board that we do a synthetic turf. In terms of students and the survey, I very much appreciate their perspective, but I also, this is going to sound really gross, but sometimes parents make decisions for kids that kids don't really like, or sometimes parents even maybe know better than kids or think they do. And so while I very much, with all due respect, I very much appreciate what students are saying, to me, that's not the most compelling. I mean, I think the sheet that we saw when Drew Wendell presented to us about all the teams and all the practices and all the games that we have to juggle and how many things get canceled, that's very compelling about the needs for our student athletes. And believe me, you all know that I am all for sports. I mean, no question. I think it's a godsend. And especially in this day and age of mental health. But I think there are very, very good reasons to support this and significant needs. I'm not compelled to make a decision in my vote. I appreciate that you're speaking on behalf of students, and I've been a dean of students for 30 years at a medical school. I'm all for students, but that's not what this is about for me. But bottom line is, I feel like as a board, I hope that we can vote to put it on we can agree all to put it on the ballot and then leave it up to the community. And, you know, there's a lot of strong feelings on many sides, and we'll see where it goes. You know, we've done it before. We've had.
That's true. We have done it before. That's true. That's true.
I'd just like to say something about student voice, because I 100% want student voice. I want it much more than we have it in our middle school and high school. But if we're going to give them voice, then we have to make sure that they are educated in a well-rounded way from multiple perspectives. And I have no evidence that any high schooler has learned about microplastics in the ecosystem. I have no evidence that they've read the study about lower leg injuries sustained on plastic turf. If they have, and then they're making a vote, then we're in a different place. But if we're just talking about playability, then yes, 100%. This is the only way to go.
Teresa, if I may, respectfully, because I spent a lot of time with our students in my 4 years here, I just listen a great deal, and I do place a lot of faith that when they've come to the mic or they've spoken to me in my office, they're coming in a very informed way. They're looking at their own experiences. We have an incredibly well-read group of students who have been guided well by our, particularly high school teachers, to be critical in their inquiry and then document their points of view. So I appreciate very much what you're saying and respect it, Teresa, but I just, having spent a lot of time with our students, I am always incredibly impressed with the rigor they bring to these points of view. And they don't go to the mic lightly. They don't come into my office lightly. And yes, it's about usage and playability. It's also about that entire perspective of the risks known. I value deeply that Hastings will vote on this. I also know that at this point, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of athletes have been playing on this type of surface, at least since the last time Hastings debated this. The technology has changed dramatically. And like it or not, at this point, when most educational institutions go in to provide an opportunity, they go for a mixed model. They hold on to some amount of natural field if they can, and they spend a great deal of money to keep it in very, very high quality, and they also will have that artificial turf option. And there is research cutting both ways on this. And I can't deny my own personal experience with a son as a college soccer coach, another now in global sports management, both spent years on soccer fields, all the rest. It's nothing here is perfect, but I know very strongly that a natural turf field is not the preference unless it's highly groomed, highly cared for, and that's why you see most educational institutions going to that mixed approach, and why our young people, and it's the dilemma you'll face, Teresa, I very much hear it as a parent, that their options to play will be substantially on artificial fields, and we're just saying within Hastings, let's have a mixed approach here. Let's have the best quality artificial field we can have that limited so there's the option to play on natural when we can, and bring it to the voters and let the voters sort it out. Because I really do think probing into the various research lines on this, like so much, you have a bit on this side, a bit on that side, and then you also on this side, you have hundreds of millions now. It's literally that if you look across the country in terms of minutes and time on a field.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that, but I would push back on the idea that the students who came before us were versed in the health risks and the environmental factors behind plastic turf. I didn't hear anybody mention anything about that.
That's fair. Listen, I think that's absolutely what these next weeks and months, the process that will get us to the bond vote. I mean, the silver lining, I think truly, when we see the energy tonight, this is not a community that's just going to have tiny rhetorical arguments, just do it, don't do it, and people get into stuff, into the facts of stuff. And so I don't have any doubt that any and all information is going to be available to anybody who's listening over the next 2 months. So, I think we're in a good place in that respect. To meet
I would
the
just like
standard.
go ahead.
No, I'm saying sort of the standard you'd like to see the community meet. I think that's the runway that we're on. We're going to get there. I think it's going to be, everything's going to be debated. And again, it's the fields stand by themselves. They stand on their own merits, and that's a very fair, clean way to do it. So, meaning, I'm saying for our purposes here tonight, talking about advancing the bond language, I think that, if you're okay with that, then I think all the concerns you're raising are stuff that we are naturally going to deeply, thoroughly address as the bond goes forward. Is that fair?
It's fair, but I feel like I'm being silenced a little bit.
You can raise a point.
But I mean, it's fair. I'm not debating that this is the best material for, usability. And the reason why so many school districts use it is because it's easy. It's an easy win when we want our kids to play, and I want our kids to play. Mm-hmm. But I will remind you all, 10 years ago, there was a war in this village about turf. People threw eggs at each other's houses. So as absolutely thorough as we can be, and I hear you, Alex, that we are about to be so thorough, I can appreciate that. We have to be even more thorough. And we have to address this from many angles. That's what I have to say.
That's fair, and I think we shall. I think we will.
I think, Teresa, too, this is an emotional vote for many people, right? And no one, I'm not trying to silence you. I'm not going to speak for everyone. I don't think anyone is trying to silence you. But it is an emotional vote, and I think that the amount of information that's out there, and whether you're a voter, whether you're a young person, you have your perspective, and not everyone has all the facts, and they're going to vote based on their emotion. So I think that when we want equity of voice for young people, I just don't want the narrative to be that the young people are not educated and we are educated, because many people, many adults vote based on emotion and not vote based on, the facts. So I just want to be sure that some factor of our thinking goes into the student experience, whether it's the student voice piece or the student experience. And what I'm hearing from everyone is we want our students to be out there playing as much as possible. And the fact of the matter for me is the way that they are going to be out there the most is if we have turf fields. But I love the dialogue. I love your opinion on this. And I don't know if this is the right time to continue this conversation, right? Because we're talking about the language of the referendum. I would love to hear from two of our students if they would like to share.
It's
some
coming next.
perspective.
So.
Well, beyond their report.
Yeah.
I would like to hear it too, and I appreciate the dialogue.
Yeah, and to be continued for sure. Can I just clarify, because I've lost track? Are we actually voting to advance to the next step in the language, or this is just informational for us?
Well, I guess what we're looking for is that you have agreement
Okay,
of
so
the
okay.
structure and the elements that are in each proposition,
Bucket,
right?
okay.
In each bucket, because then next week the next board meeting, not next week,
Okay,
the
so it's sort of like
22nd,
a
you would vote.
soft vote where we're kind of.
Well, I think you're
It's
just.
a discussion
yes.
and giving us indication of
Yeah.
then what to refine to bring back to you to
All right.
vote on the
And
22nd.
like
So-
our recommendation is to break up the vote.
Right, okay. So
Right.
why don't we just go around and trustees can say if they're comfortable. We're not all here tonight, but for the 5 of us that are, we can go forward and say where we're at, so we can wrap it. Jody, you want to go first or last?
I am comfortable with having the bond, as you're recommending, be in 3 parts. And I think we put the turf on the ballot and we see what people want to do.
Fair enough.
I want to say one thing about that, though. We also have to be very clear when we're explaining all of this, why we can't do turf talents. Because I think, again, it's one of those things like we're just making a beautiful glass atrium. I think it sounds very appealing. It was very appealing. But that there are very specific reasons why we can't do it. And that's why we are where we are. So I'm comfortable with that being that way on the bottom.
That's a very fair point. And I think one of the things, I'm in favor of breaking this up, is to your point, it puts the onus on all of us to make the best case possible, because it's not based upon pressure or leverage. It stands on its own merits, and that's a very fair way to do it. So I'm in favor of it as with the proviso of what he made about point number 2, I'm in favor of moving forward with it.
Yeah, I'm in favor of moving forward with it, and I like that the turf fields are broken out separately. I think that's important. I have some suggestion on kind of the language for question 2. I could maybe, with kind of, I like the creation of instructional space leading with that, because I think that's the driver.
Yeah, agreed.
Teresa?
Teresa, I think you're like the Wizard of Oz.
Hello. I'm comfortable putting this language on, calling this our official bond language.
Okay. Okay. So you guys have what you need, I assume? So, okay, so we're good. So thank you all very much. It's a preview. We're going to have very robust discussions to come, I'm certain. Moving on to continued
We
budget.
want to hear from students that
Oh,
are
yeah.
here?
Can we, I was just following the thing. Can we move them up?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I know it was longer than anticipated, so.
I know you have scheduled remarks, but if you want to add anything
Yes.
to anything you say,
Okay.
please feel free.
So Ella, Kai,
Then go
welcome. Thank you
home.
for being patient. And we'll have the student report.
So before we get into...
I think your mic's...
Hello.
He's got it, there we go.
Gorgeous. So before we get into all of this, I'll just comment really quickly. I'm going to preface this by saying I am neither an athlete nor an expert on all of the health impacts that a synthetic turf would present. But I will say that the overwhelming response that I have heard from students is that a turf field will guarantee not only more playing time, but less injuries, and it seems to be just the overwhelming preference. I've done like preliminary research into the long-lasting health impacts of turf. And I know that some of the major concerns are more towards the microplastics, the PFAs, and the PAHs, sorry. And again, I'm not claiming to be an expert on any of this. I think that our current climate is just a lot of microplastics. Everything that we consume has a lot, and it's honestly probably going to get worse, so we'll see how that one turns out. But I think that just taking into consideration, you know, the comfort levels of what we put into our bodies, I think that what the turf presents hasn't, in at least our lifetime, been proven to have specific lasting impacts. I know that one of the major concerns is the PFAs and their connection to certain types of cancers. Most of the research in that has been done only on invertebrates, and there's not a lot of really specific testing that has been done with specific impacts on humans. There's also some issues with endocrine systems that happen in relation to the PFAs and the PAHs. Again, most of that was with invertebrates and with studies on chickens and chicken eggs and the fertility that that causes. So,
My goodness.
Preliminary research, this is just, you know, like...
Just preliminary.
No, I'm, okay. This is...
I told you they bring rigor.
This is not detailed and intense. I promise I'm not an expert on this at all. I'm just saying that a lot of the research is still in progress just because this is obviously something very new. And I personally think that it's, you know, important to listen to the students who, they're the up and coming generation. We are who, not me personally, but we are who would be on the, playing on the fields and doing all of this. I am a really outdoorsy person. If I could live in the middle of the woods with absolutely nothing synthetic around me, I 100% would. But I think that just given how we as a society are evolving and how we're moving forwards, I think that, you know, if we're really looking for what's best for our students and for our student athletes in particular, then listening to what they want is definitely, I would say, would outweigh what else we're thinking about.
Thank you.
I don't know if we actually have one.
Oh, will it reach? Oh, you're right. The other one. We're shorthanded tonight, so lots of mics.
Do you want to share the report or?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Kai.
So I'll start off by saying that the High School Musical, Mamma Mia, was this past weekend, and it was a huge success with a cast of over 30 talented performers from all 4 grades. It was just number after number after number of the most energetic dancing I've ever seen. Beautiful, beautiful harmonies. Everyone's voices blended so well. The acting was phenomenal. It was such a fun thing to watch. I've been involved in the performances before, but getting to just like sit back and listen to the crowds of people losing their minds was so much fun. So huge congrats to Lori, the cast, and the crew for a very successful theatrical season.
Right on.
Another shout out to Matt Corbo, who is a junior. He is nominated for LoHUD's Baseball Player of the Week this week. So we always love come out and really support our players. So please, please, please vote for him. Mr. Wendell has been sending out emails, and there should be a link in everybody's inbox. So
voted.
vote for him.
Go on Low HUD, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's in all our emails.
Before 3 p.m. tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I am very excited for this next one. One of my very dear friends, Adam Greenwald, has progressed to the International Science and Engineering Fair. So this is a science research-based presentation. So at WESF, which is the Westchester Science and Engineering Fair, he was one of the top 20 presenters, and those 20 students are going to make their way to Ohio next month, and they are going to present their projects alongside students from all over the world. It is a really, really fantastic opportunity. So this is so well deserved. Huge congratulations to Adam on his hard work, and we are all rooting for him. We're going to wish him so much luck at ISAF.
That's wonderful.
So something up and coming, we've got the Color Run by the PTSA. This is something that we've been working on along with the Student Union as well. So it's going to be on Sunday, May 4th, from 9 to 11 in the morning. It's a 5K run throughout Hastings. There's going to be color stations where people who are willing participants will get paint powder thrown on them, and wearing white shirts, they'll get to keep those as a fun souvenir of this awesome experience. So it's $48 to sign up. That can be online. There's posters everywhere with QR codes. It raises money for the middle school and high school students, and we are also really encouraging teams of students to run too. So we could have different sports teams going, different clubs who will run as a team together. So it's a really great opportunity and something I'm really looking forward to personally. The team with the most winning members is going to win a pizza and ice cream party sponsored by the Student Union. So just a little extra something.
Excellent. Thank you, Connie. Thank you.
Okay, so this Thursday is actually a really big event for Amnesty International because we're going to be hosting a charity slam. So it's going to be this Thursday on the 10th. And it's an auction for charity which is voted by the community, and clubs will be presenting a charity of their choosing. So for example, STEM Club, we're going to be presenting on the Environmental Defense Fund. So hopefully we'll be able to convince the attendees to vote for our charities to support. So basically, it's $10 per entry, and all proceeds, like to the winning charity in the club, all the proceeds will go to that charity. And then there will also be food, music by the band A2 Brutus, which is, I believe, 2 sophomores. They're very amazing. They played at the Battle of the Bands. And then there will also be an online auction, which will be running online for a week after, so next week also. And we're also going to have the MCV Ben Emtich, which is going to be a lot of fun because he's going to make up a human rights game, which will be encouraging and fun to watch.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. It'll also, just to mention the start time, it will be starting at 6 and just $10 entry. Also this afternoon at 4:30 was our awesome varsity baseball team, and they played against Ardsley, which I believe they won, so congrats to them. So it's very exciting, and we will continue to support our teams. And so I think a lot of fun things are happening for the baseball team this week.
Great.
And then also last weekend was the annual used book fair at Hillside. It went really well and supported by parent volunteers and also members of National Honor Society. And all the Hillside students had the opportunity to visit the fair, and it was open to everyone who wanted to take a look. So there will definitely be more next year, and it's always something fun to look forward to.
Well, can I ask you, you said there's an online component.
Yeah.
Where can people find that? Or
So we will be sending out a letter for Amnesty. So each Amnesty member is supposed to send them out to 10 people. Hopefully, I will be sending them out to you guys, so you can access it.
We're easy to find.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just want to say that Matt Corbo needs votes.
I voted this morning, but
I just voted.
yeah. Thank you both, and feel
They
free.
give you, they list everybody
Yeah, you
and
can
they
keep
tell
voting,
what their
yeah.
percentages are.
Like
if you're-
Yeah,
Chicago.
the kid from Yorktown had 20% this morning, so.
Yeah, it's like
There's a lot of people in
That's
Yorktown.
That's the thing
So-
about it, that.
I know, it's kind of not right.
You can
Yeah.
vote as many
Yeah,
times
it's-
as you want.
yeah,
Just keep
That's
doing it.
Chicago method, my hometown, early and often.
Right, early and often.
Yeah. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Because we've gone quite a while, I'm going to move public comment up. I don't know when signed up yet, but in case anybody does want to comment, I'm going to move it up to now. So, a couple moments warning, just in case anybody would like to say anything. No? Okay, that's okay. Oh, no, sure, feel free. Let me just, oh, Patrick, you have it? Okay, thanks. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm sorry I didn't know about, I forgot about the sign up.
It's okay.
I'm Kathy Sullivan. My question is, what's in the bond? What documentation is there that we can see to know what's in the bond?
Okay.
We saw a revised scheme of one part of it, but there've been a lot of revisions, and it would be helpful to understand exactly what people are going to be voting for. I think the issue has been the board hasn't clarified the scope of the project very well, and that's something that you guys should do for, as well as updating the drawings. That's been the point of confusion, like what was the goal of the bond, and I think you've become clearer with identifying that it's going to help support current programs. It wasn't about growth, which I think a lot of people thought it was originally. What's the educational need for a two-story dining room, a cafeteria? There really isn't any. I support a new cafeteria very much. I know I've heard from my children who've been long gone from here, it hasn't changed. And I don't understand why there's the push to make a glass in room 40 feet away from a brick building that's taller than it. I mean, there's no view there, not at all. I mean, the architects, in my opinion, put these bleachers where a very beautiful view could have been. And I think it's sort of funny that it's kind of the reverse now. There's a lot of glass being proposed for a place that's not that attractive to look on. I'm going to speak a little bit to the secret process that you guys went through.
Just know we have 3 minutes, so.
Okay. The secret process is in your hands. Parts 1 and 2 are yours. Okay? Part 1, you identify the problem. 2, you talk about the impacts and decide how to mitigate them in 3. So if you're looking to look at that document, there's a backup information that's available on the DEC site, the Department of Environmental Conservation. Very easy to use, called the EDF Mapper. But more than that, there's explanation for what you need to do. You're supposed to identify impacts and decide how significant they are. And that could be something that it would be very helpful. I think the thing that was overlooked was the issue of the change in transportation that the central entrance is going to cause. And I think you guys might want to talk a little bit about that. All the students are becoming funneled into one area now. All the pedestrian, vehicle, everything's going to be headed to one place, unlike being dispersed around the school. And I spoke to this once before, and I think to Jody, but I don't know how many people remember when the school board tried to, or the school administration changed the pattern around the school to improve it, and it ended that very same day. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to a continued budget discussion prior to the adoption, which would be on the 22nd as well. So, are we going to present on this? Or?
Well, I think the presentation is basically the same one that we had provided at our last board meeting. We just updated the slide deck. Wait, is this not working? Just to reflect let me just get there, thanks, Joe. So these are, again, just reminders that we are still at that same level of budget. Well, we increased the budget to budget change when we added back some of the staffing at the high school, but we're still at the tax cap and the resulting tax increase, again, negative due to more increase in assessments, but not necessarily negative in terms of the cost of this. Again, staffing recap from the March 25th meeting. This, again, if there's any questions, we just wanted to put in the record the items that were presented by the Hillside School, by the middle school, which none of these have changed thus, since the last time we met. But again, just to clarify, at the high school, we are now, in fact, going to be replacing fully the retired social studies teacher. We are effectively, although it's a 0.2 reduction in ELA, that is mostly, it's picked up in the MTSS structure. But just again, we put a clarification that because there's some internal shifts, they do have 7 full-time English teachers in the high school, just the way that kind of plays out in terms of FTE. We just wanted to capture that there. Again, we did go up now with, we are posting, and we have posted for a combined math and special education teacher, which will then result in a 1.0 higher in that category. And you can see the math behind that in terms of the retirement, in terms of the mathematics, and then what will be then moving forward with the math staffing will be in the high school. And then we did have an opportunity to combine that with special education, and which will result in a 1.0 FTE higher there. In addition to those items, again, just as I started out with, the social studies is no longer listed here because that in fact is going to be a full-time hire, so that would not be a reduction. So that's why it's not on the slide anymore. There's no reduction there. And then beyond although the middle part, maybe I should just reword that because I think reductions may be a little bit misleading, maybe modification, but we'll change that language. Again, in addition to those, there's an additional beyond the, there will be an additional special ed beyond what is combined there with the math that we'll be hiring. And that's somewhere between a 0.5 and 0.7 currently. And part of that is just being fleshed out with the programs that students that currently are having their IEP reviews at this time of the year, like depending upon that, we already know we'll be increasing some programming at the high school to address the needs of the students that we currently have in district that may need those things. And again, nothing else has changed since the previous budget that we presented. So again, other than increasing, meaning there's no other reductions, no other additions, except for those modifications we made within the high school. And then again, this is things that we've previously discussed. One of the items we just, not to beat a dead horse on it, but these are things that we didn't really, they were in the record, but we really didn't review. Not that I'm going to read line by line this evening, but just as an example from the last meeting to today, there are things that we are now aware of in terms of, like as an example, residents that are looking to either send their children out next year to either private schools, whether special ed, parentally placed, or private school parentally placed. We have 10 additional students that have requested transportation. So, that when we do the budget number, beyond the students that we already knew that we were also sending out. So as an example, there will potentially maybe, there will be some type of modification now needed to that out of district budget. So again, as we move around things, that's going to require either, the problem is until those routes are fully flushed out with the Quad Village and all the rest, we don't really know what the full impact of that is. Some of the students may join an existing route, but there are some students, particularly some parentally placed special ed students who are new to the district that are going to schools that we do not service currently within the Quad. So we know that is going to be an additional bus for us, unless somebody else in between now and September has another student there.
So you meant those 10 people, that's current, that's new information?
That's new.
And that's if we have 30 or 5 already that were,
I think, no, there's like, with parentally placed and with our own out-of-district students, probably about 48 students.
48, but then 10 more.
Well, we dropped some, but we already knew some students were coming back to district, but
Okay.
I would say 10 more than we
So like
budgeted for.
20% increase.
Yeah, yeah. 10 more than we budgeted for. Yeah, now, granted, not each of these students, some of them will be added to existing routes, but it's just an example of, you adopt a budget in April, and between April and September is 5 months, everything changes, and even with the busing,
Not
because,
everything,
but yeah, parents who live currently in the district have up until April 1st to apply for out-of-district busing for the following school
okay.
year, which
Gotcha.
again is somewhat late, but in addition to that, legally, any family that moves into the district between now and any time next school year, being they wouldn't be here to make the April 1st deadline. Once they apply, and we have that, like if a parent moved in November and their student was already placed out and they applied, we'd have to provide it to them. It's, so there are things, I'm just using busing,
Yeah.
because you could have 1 or 2 students, depending on the school, that could potentially cause a significant expenditure. It could be like $100,000. Like, that's how significant, if we're not busing to that school, the costs, structure shift is. And again, we're just talking again, things, annual reviews. I just mentioned that earlier when I went over the staffing slide. Thankfully, we do have some contingency at the high school level, but that's really based on existing students that are in our schools, right? It doesn't take into account students who may move into the schools. And again, I don't want to speak in too many specifics, but there are students in the last literally week, that are coming from elsewhere that have IEPs and have indicated that their children have, whatever. With our understanding is that they may need additional services, and that's students that are actually coming in now, toward the end of the school year, and it doesn't even account for any students that we may get. So we have our own annual reviews that are occurring that could potentially have a result that could increase our cost. And although those, at least there's a little bit of, there's some consideration within the special ed budget for some of that, as I discussed with staffing, but there are other, again, this is every school, this isn't unique to things, but, just when we were creating the budget, it's more to say, as much as sometimes it may seem, when we're talking about, well, why are you cutting this 20,000, because then there's other things in which things can go one way or the other really quickly. So, everything does matter. And again, we talked a lot tonight about the bond vote, and particularly the BCS items. And as we discussed pretty thoroughly, the importance of all the bond, quite frankly, going up. But, in particular, if that part of the bond or all the bond were to fail, there are some other implications, on the operational budget that it would create. And as an example, even if the bond, were to go down completely, we didn't budget for a revote next year. We would just either have no vote, would not have, I don't know what we would do, but I think right now we didn't plan for an expenditure of not only your professionals here tonight, any work that they do that continues or meetings that they get paid, and as well as a vote itself in a separate year would, $12,000-$15,000 of expense related to just a separate vote. So again, I'd be more concerned about the professional services that, you could rack up pretty easily if we were to need to do another vote. And so I think if it were to go down, I think, we would probably not do anything. I don't know. And then the things that have to get fixed, we'd have to figure it out within operational reductions. Enrollment class size impact, again, we've gone over and, we'll talk about, that's for every building, right? A couple, you can get 5 to 6 kids in a particular grade level, and I've seen where that has caused some concern about even whether it be Hillside Middle School or high school, but particularly where, you're just like at the grade level, then you start looking. And I was actually reviewing, people had sent out their average class sizes, in particular from K to 5. And honestly, we're not at the lower level. Most of schools in Westchester are 18 to 21, you know, and we already have sections that are in our elementary school that are going to be above that next year. So I say that to say, you know, for whatever reason, it does occur where I think this year we had either, I don't want to misspeak, but maybe 10 additional students in fifth grade or, you know, above what we thought. So again, it's not out of reason that we could see some influx in just general enrollment. So again, these are just things as we, you know, as we think about the budget, which you will also have to adopt, I guess, at April 22nd as a board, you know, there's definitely a lot of concern, and we're not even in next year. You know, forget about, we're not concerned right now about funding because the governor and our legislators have, at least up until this point, we feel as though they even said the delay in the state budget is nothing to do with funding, it's to do with other items in the state budget, in particular like MTA funding and other items that are not educational. So we feel confident that we'll get, you know, what, if not, maybe even a couple bucks more, hopefully. And again, leave replacements, things such as this, you know, as I mentioned, we cut that back. Again, this is, you know, you could have, unfortunately it does happen, and we don't want to see it happen. You could have staff members that either become ill, you know, need to be out for long periods of time, and the cost to replace them, you know, because they're getting paid. So I'm just, not to keep beating a dead horse, but there are many things in which, and I think it's important to keep them here because sometimes it may seem, there may have been other things that we would have liked to have added in this budget process and we were unable to do so. And then making some modifications alone. And again, you know, we've talked about it ad nauseum, just some of the repairs we've had to make around the building the last couple of years. And again, the impact of a failed budget. Again, you know, a large concern there because it's really difficult to understand then when we put up another spending plan, you know, how do you make those adjustments? If we were to have a failed budget, and this is always something we discuss as part of this budget deliberation, just, you know, in terms of we, of course, put it in budget materials, that if it were to fail and we didn't put it for a revote, it would be a $1.7 million reduction in expenditures. And even if you were to put it for a revote, typically you don't, because you can't risk going for a revote with the same budget. No one would do that. And it's very difficult to pinpoint like what the reason is outside of money, because that's typically why people vote budgets down. So, I mean, the last time something like that happened, we did go and cut, you know, $700,000-800,000 out of the spending plan. But as you know, for the long times we talked about staffing this year, you know, any type of change would be a quite significant, you know, impact to our district. So you're talking about like some real severe, you know, budget impacts. So again, these are just things, I'm not suggesting that, but we always keep our eye on these things because as you've all talked about, being fiduciaries and understanding that all we have to not only worry about, we have to worry about all these other items between now and between June 30th of 26, because, you know, it's like 5 months to the school till the school year begins, but then there's another, you know, it's the remainder of the school year we have to have enough money to pay for. So these are, again, just things, tuition variability, I put a lot in here. Investment income, you know, the feds are talking about cutting the rates. We rely on that interest income as part of our revenue package to support this budget. As I mentioned, 4 years ago, we had $30,000 worth of revenue. Yeah. This year we have $550,000 or $600,000. But, you know, the rates have already dropped from, you know, not significantly, but they are coming down. And I know, I think I read it right, the Fed is suggesting that they're going to cut they're going to take some, you know, cuts to the interest rate. So, but that, even if it were to drop 1%, I mean, we could lose $100,000 worth of revenue. So that's why I'm a little higher than we like to. Typically, districts, we try to keep that number as conservative as possible because of the variability in the last definitely like 5 to 7 years of, you know, being at 0, then being back up at 5 and all the rest. So these are things on the revenue side of things too we have to keep our eye on. And then again, the long-term reserve management, because, you know, we do use, as we should, some of it to offset our budgets each year. But again, if we're unable to replenish them, they run out, and then you have a larger deficit, a larger funding hole. So with all that good news, and
we should have done the students last.
No, but again, these are, you know, again, these are all things that we've with you before, and these are things that I did put, again, just as a reminder, for not only, because when we create our budget, we're looking, as we need to, and we're required to do so, not only for 25, 26, the sustainability, right? So when budgets, right, one of the requirements of the New York State Controller is that school boards review 5-year plans and understand them, because when you make decisions, you're making them, you have to make them not in a vacuum, right? To understand then, okay, what does it look like? We already know that 26, 27, we have some major, as we did this year, and we used a lot of fund balance to balance our budget, some major, funding concerns. Again, the things I listed there, and I talked to a colleague about this today, we were talking about Swiss Chip in particular. All health insurance is outrageously expensive, and it's the market. It's not unique to our carrier. Actually, Nice Ship, which is the state plan, is more expensive than our current, and it would be, if we were still in that plan, it would cost us a few $100,000 more than we currently pay. But again, they've already signaled to us, and this is about sustaining the plan, and even if they've already talked about increasing co-pays and everything for members, but even with that, they said, this year it was 9 point something, a little bit over 9% was the increase to our health insurance, and they have, because people in my job have to plan for 5 years out, and they said 26, 27, 8 to 10%. Yeah, but on like $8 million, it's not insignificant. So you just, thinking of that, and as we talked about the tax levy, the limitations within the tax levy, cap limits, how, if next year we're at a flat 2%, that is $900,000. So the health insurance increase would take up that, and then that doesn't account for loss in revenues, because you have to make up. So I say all that to say, it's extremely difficult, and I think even though we made some decisions that for short term to close some gaps and, provide what people were looking for, there needs to be a really good plan, like unless things significantly change or we start getting even more money from revenue, which I don't think will happen, as we look out, there has to be some level of commitment of considering, doing overrides if the tax cap were to be flat, or making some serious reductions in staffing. I mean, because that's the only place you're getting like the reductions, right? So I see all that. There's definitely concerns. I anticipate, because we're on such a tight budget, that even prior to the year starting, we may have to, within our spending plan, we may have to make some adjustments based upon some of the things. Like once we find out with the busing, like, again, we cut our E&L staffing, like if one new student comes in, and if they're not able to be grouped with someone, we have to hire somebody, which was not something we did wrestle with, reducing that.
Can I kind of say,
Sure.
I think what I'm hearing a lot is sort of, in order to get to this year's budget, there's a lot of things that had to be squeezed into fitting just that shape. And it's not going to take a lot to put us out of that, to sort of break things. So we have to be, if that comes up,
Right.
that's what we sort of planned for. We made that sort of trade-off this year.
Right. No, we did. And I think we spoke about, I think, throughout this whole process, we've been talking about all the things that I've just, again, recapped for everyone. So we obviously, we wouldn't have made the recommendations. We made the recommendations saying, we have a stopgap this year, and we increased our allocation of fund balance to get there. And we're also fortunate that we have, we've had some retirements that actually, some of the breakage in salary, I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about even with the replacements, again, when you have retirements, districts use that as an advantage to bring in newer people to save money. You have to. Like, right. that is, I was talking about that today with actually another district. We were talking about, the breakage in salaries. And because health insurance is so expensive now, the breakage you get from a retiree, because your retirees, most of our retirees are 55, and that's still their primary health insurance for 10 years. So being that the health insurance is so costly, when you now almost have like 2 full health plans for one position.
Oh, gotcha.
So when you hire a replacement for the retiree, it does require you, in order to have any savings, to require them almost like 1 or 2 years in, or else then you're now dipping into, you're actually creating a larger hole. So I think, sometimes people say, well, why aren't you replacing? I'm just using that, like, because I had this conversation, like, because it actually then costs us more money. And we're severely limited under the tax cap legislation to how much money we can increase our budget, there has to be some adjustments. And again, most districts, I was talking to a colleague, they're much more wealthy district than ours, and they've made it where you can't hire anybody above a certain step because they can't afford it, and we're not alone. And we were talking a lot about the New Rochelle situation, which we know they're cutting like 200 employees. And you say, oh, how does that happen there?
Yeah.
It's not, to me, because I know people work there and, this idea, oh, they've mismanaged it. It's not that. It can happen, I'm not saying at that same level, but I've seen it happen elsewhere where, it's very easy to go over like fiscal cliffs, especially because you can have a bunch of things. I mean, they've been dealing with other things, enrollment and other kinds of drops, but I'm not defending them. I'm just saying, but I'm sure that, like it can happen to districts. And I don't think we're alone in that. And speaking to colleagues, because Maureen brought up tariffs, like, we didn't account for any tariff increases in our budget. Cost of services, cost of anything. I mean, there are things in which are just in our basic taking care of the building that require us to buy things. And actually, I cut Joe's budget for supplies. I mean, our supply budget for just like toilet paper has exponentially gone up over the last 5 years, like in terms of just the cost of securing things we need just to clean our building. So I say all that to say we haven't even accounted for that. So as we talk about the projects, we don't have it in our operational budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, boy. Okay, Maureen, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the things that I think
Bearer of bad news.
we need to do, to be sure, I mean, there's a lot of information that has to get out, but we have to be sure to be talking about the whole business of what if a budget fails and a contingency budget and the implications.
Oh, yeah.
We need to be
Oh, yeah.
very
Front and center. next
explicit.
meeting.
Yeah, it has a big impact, a
Absolutely.
snowball effect, yeah.
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 Yes. Okay, thank you. Moving on to report from superintendent. Do you have anything you want to pull
Alex,
out?
hold on one second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot about you, Teresa.
I
Yes.
forgot you're there.
Hi. Is this the right time to ask about how AIS is going to look at the high school next year? I mean, I know we're talking about the budget, and AIS reconfiguration was part of that conversation. So can I just ask a clarifying
Sure.
question?
Yes.
Is ASS only going to be offered for Regents level classes?
I didn't.
Sorry, say again?
Is AIS support only going to be offered for Regents level courses?
No.
No, so
No.
AIS is meant, is this my phone?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. AIS is meant to be more of a personalized intervention, that it's targeted and tailored. So the plan is for it to be offered in ELA and mathematics, and then it will be specific to the skills that students need to be able to close gaps. So the process that we are working to strengthen is the MTSS process, where students are referred to the committee if there's a concern, that there's a review of data, there are metrics and a target for intervention put into place, and then the AIS component is the scheduled, targeted remediation component to help that student progress faster and fill in whatever is needed to bring them to proficiency. So it's not meant to be only attached to certain classes, but rather it's an intervention that is meant for students. And it is
Right.
specific to ELA and mathematics, if that's helpful.
That's helpful. So hypothetically, if you have a ninth grader who's in geometry, but this child is struggling, and the teachers get together and do an MTSS process for this student, he or she could receive AIS for geometry, even though geometry is not a Regents level course.
Yeah, that's the idea. The idea is that we are strengthening our MTSS process so that, and we don't jump immediately to AIS support. That would be a tier 2 intervention. So supports would be put into place first, typically at the classroom level, and there would be progress monitoring, and then students would come back to the table. Typically, an intervention can last about 6 to 8 weeks. It depends. But then if a child is not responding, if a student's not responding, then they would be discussed again at the MTSS table, and then that is where there might be a referral to AIS for a set period of time to address whatever the targeted skill is.
Got it. So that's an error, that only Regents level ELA
Yes.
and math.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
And then let me speak,
No,
I'll
of
speak
course.
quickly to a handout that you as a board have, and it's in the public record. Andy Clayman provided class size clarification, so that's before all of you. He broke it down in terms of the core underclassmen class sizes, 9th and 10th grade for English, social studies, math, and science. Those are numbers then, are lower on average than is commonly reported. He then added in for me, there are 21 courses that have 25 students or more, and that's listed on the second page here. So a lot of good detail as to, what the averages mean. But I think it was helpful, and it was a couple board members who'd asked that question, so we put it into the public record here for you and for others.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Teresa, you good on that?
I am, I think it makes us look bad, though, to
Well-
only highlight 9th and 10th grade
Well, that's
core
where,
classes.
but that's where the average swing was, if you will, or the swing on the averages. That's where the averages could have been misleading.
Right. I think, though, that people were questioning, why were we saying that the average class size was like 21 when their children are in classes of 25, 26, 27? But the calculation was coming because we were also finding the average by using very
so-
small classes, like
yeah.
electives. Am I
Yeah.
correct? in
Well,
that?
we sent, you may not have seen it, in the record, which we sent you, there's the two-pager that we presented this evening from Andy, breaking out the.
I saw it.
Okay, so it addresses what you're asking.
Yeah.
It shows that we actually, in the core 9th through 10th grade classes, the averages are down at the 22, 25, 19, and 22 level. And then I said, okay, but there are larger classes, so Andy went in and pulled every single one of those that are larger. So you see within the high school, there are 21 courses that are larger.
Yeah,
But that's the extent of them.
Right. What I'm saying is, I think it's excellent to share those numbers, and I thank you and I thank Andy. But it would also be great if we're going to show the numbers to then show how the classes get smaller in 11th and 12th grade, if they do. Do you know, like, just to highlight the 9th and 10th grade, do you know what I'm saying?
No, I hear you. We can do that. We were looking at, those numbers will come down. We were looking at the concern that we were that the average was misleading. We were trying to say, actually, in your core 9th and 10th grade classes, those are quite good average class sizes as you look across competitive high schools. And then I would attach this, if you will, to the 8 or 9 slides that Maureen shared, that we are getting where we're getting on the current budget, and we cannot anticipate more money next year to address class size issues without some very serious decisions about staffing levels.
Yeah.
I put a very strong letter out to the community on Friday saying that if we don't get this bond, we don't get this budget. Hastings, we're in an environment that nobody wants to think about in terms of the extent of cutbacks.
I'm not questioning that. I'm totally with you on that.
It's a general comment, Teresa. It's not directed towards you.
Okay. My feedback was just that in the community letter, it said that average class size was 20, but it didn't say which grade you were talking about. So parents who have children who are in core subjects that have upwards of 25 students in them might feel like, might wonder why is the district saying that the average class size is 20? That's what my feedback was about.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and that's why we did the two-pager. I'll go back to Andy to say, could you add in the 11th and 12th and round it out?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on, update district highlights.
Yeah, what we're going to do, you have a rather full report here, which is always is wonderful. Kai, Elle, and I never coordinate, but they hit it more beautifully than we do in the written mural. But this is Melissa DeLibera put this together. Thank you. It picks up a lot of what that was spoken to. Just to be clear, we get 21 hours a week from Kara Tamayo. I've redirected her to be substantially focused on the budget and bond for the next 8 weeks. And we think with that amount of time, we'll get good coverage from her. And then Melissa and I will tag team a bit on what you see in these weeklies. But we know that our wonderful student board liaisons will bring a lot of what we have here. So it's a redirect. So.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. And it's posted here, of course.
Yes.
In board docs. Moving on to business items. Let me open it. Are there any questions or comments regarding business items 1 through 13?
I just had a question on the asbestos item. Is that a kind of a required amount, a required survey?
yes,
And now it's
prior.
kind of post-flood?
Well, no,
Or
this
that
is,
just
this
happens
is
to be
just our,
coincidental? Okay.
yeah.
It's just the timing it requires.
Correct,
Okay,
yep.
gotcha.
Right,
Thank
right. Yeah, thank you. Is there a motion to approve business items 1 through 13?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Moving on to moving on to placement services for CSC and CPSC. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve our placement and services for CSC and CPSC?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to personnel for appointments. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve our appointment?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to approval of minutes. This would have been from the March 25th meeting. Are there any questions, comments? Is there a motion to approve our minutes from the March 25th meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on, new business. We will be voting on this. This is the plan for the disbursement of inclement weather days. There are 3 days set up, which we discussed last week, I guess, in the other meeting. They are Friday, May 23rd, Tuesday, May 27th, so bookending the Memorial Day weekend, and then pulling back the last day of the school year, which is currently listed as Friday, June 27th. The new last day of the school year will become the 26th. Are there any questions, comments, discussion points? Is there a motion to approve our planned give-back days?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye? Teresa?
No, I'm saying aye.
Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay.
And we will send a blast out tomorrow and update the calendar so it shows this change.
Okay. Second public comment, just in case anybody's motivated. No, that's okay. Agenda review, we got a big meeting coming up on the 22nd. I know we have the phone policy in there.
You're going right where I'm going.
Yeah. Punt.
Yeah, so I think that, we want to have that discussion board with you, in particular Andy and Scott. I would suggest we move it off of the 22nd. We'll find a slot. What, we may be backing towards will be some quick policy work, depending on what the governor decides. But I think.
we're still waiting on that. That's
I think we're prepared to move that quickly, if need be. So yes, let's take that off the 22nd.
Yeah, that looks like a good idea. Okay. Opening up for any board.
Sorry, Melissa. It's the bouncing ball.
I know, it keeps
It's a
going.
bouncing phone.
Yeah. Any Board of Ed comments to wrap us up? No? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor? All right, feel better, Teresa and Catherine.
Thank you, Tricia. Thanks for hanging in.
Thank you for hanging in there, students.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah, thank you.